The wind cut through Blackthorn Keep like a blade through bone. It was the kind of cold that made servants move faster through the corridors, that turned breath into fog even inside the stone halls, that seemed to seep through walls no matter how many fires burned in the hearths. But the true cold inside the keep had nothing to do with winter. Lady Seraphine Vane. No, Lady Seraphine Blackthorn now, though the name still felt foreign on her tongue after 8 years, stood at the window of her chambers watching snow bury the courtyard below. Her fingers pressed against the glass, feeling the ice forming on the other side. Everything here was ice, the stone, the air, the silence, the marriage. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did nothing against the chill that lived inside her chest. 26 years old, and she felt ancient, hollowed out, like something that used to be alive but had been preserved too long in frost. Downstairs, she could hear the faint sounds of the household preparing for another day, servants moving through their routines, the clatter of kitchen work beginning, the low murmur of voices that never rose above a whisper inside these walls. No one shouted in Blackthorn Keep. No one laughed. No one did anything that might disturb the terrible, suffocating peace that Duke Rowan Blackthorn demanded from his household. Seraphine closed her eyes. 8 years ago, she'd arrived at this keep as a bride. 17 years old, terrified, hopeful in the way only the very young and very foolish can be hopeful. She'd been taught all her life that marriage to a powerful man was the highest achievement a woman of her station could reach. The Vane family wasn't wealthy, but they had an old name, good blood, the kind of respectability that made them useful for alliances. And Rowan Blackthorn had needed a wife. She could still remember the first time she'd seen him. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as his keep. Handsome in a brutal sort of way. Young, only 24 then, but already carrying himself with the iron discipline of a man twice his age. He'd looked at her exactly once during their wedding ceremony. His gaze had passed over her face with the same attention he might give to a chair or a candlestick, noting its existence, cataloging its features, then moving on to more important matters. That should have told her everything. The wedding night had been worse than she'd feared and exactly what she should have expected. Brief, clinical. Rowan had performed his duty with the same grim efficiency he brought to managing his estates, then retreated to his own chambers before dawn. She'd lain awake in the darkness afterward, trying to understand what she'd done wrong, why he'd looked at her like she was something to be endured rather than embraced. It had taken her nearly a year to realize she hadn't done anything wrong. Rowan simply didn't want her, didn't want anyone, didn't want the messy, complicated business of caring about another human being. "My lady?" Seraphine turned from the window to find her maid, Elspeth, standing in the doorway. The girl was barely 18, with kind eyes and the sort of quiet competence that made her invaluable in a household where silence was law. "Yes?" "Breakfast is ready. Shall I bring it up, or would you prefer to dine in the morning room?" Alone or alone, Seraphine thought. Those were always her choices. "I'll come down." Elspeth nodded and disappeared. Seraphine took a moment to check her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes that no amount of powder could fully hide. Hair the color of honey pulled back in a simple style because there was no point in elaborate arrangements when no one looked at her anyway. She was still beautiful. She knew that in the distant, objective way someone might know a painting was well executed. But beauty didn't matter in a house where the master had decided not to see you. The walk from her chambers to the morning room took her through the long gallery, past portraits of dead blackthorns who stared down from their frames with the same cold disapproval Rowan wore like armor. She kept her eyes forward, her steps measured. She'd learned early not to hurry through the keep. Hurrying implied emotion, and emotion was something Duke Rowan Blackthorn did not tolerate. The morning room was empty when she arrived. Of course it was. Rowan took his breakfast in his study, same as he did every morning. They hadn't shared a meal in, she calculated quickly, 3 years? Maybe 4? There had been a time early in their marriage when she'd tried, when she'd dressed carefully and gone down to breakfast hoping he might join her, hoping for conversation, for anything resembling connection. He'd made it clear, in his cold, precise way, that her presence at his morning table was neither required nor desired. Seraphine sat down at the small table where a single place setting waited. Bread, butter, jam, tea. The same breakfast she'd eaten for 8 years. Elspeth had once asked if she'd like something different, eggs perhaps, or meat, but Seraphine had told her not to bother. The kitchen staff had enough to do without catering to the unwanted Duchess. She just lifted her teacup when she heard it, laughter. Actual laughter, rolling through the halls of Blackthorn Keep like something from another world. Seraphine froze, the cup halfway to her lips. In 8 years, she had never heard that sound inside these walls. Never. The servants didn't laugh. The visiting nobles didn't laugh. Rowan certainly didn't laugh. But someone was laughing now, and the sound was getting closer. The morning room door burst open. Absolutely ridiculous, Rowan, even for you. The man's been dead for 15 years and you're still enforcing his damned house rules like, oh. The speaker stopped short when he saw Seraphine. She stared. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with the same dark hair as Rowan, but lacking entirely the Duke's granite composure. This man moved like fire, all loose energy and casual grace. He wore traveling clothes dusted with snow, and his grin was so warm and alive that looking at it actually hurt. Well, well, he said, his grin widening. The mysterious Duchess Blackthorn herself. I was starting to think you were a ghost. Behind him, filling the doorway like a thundercloud, stood Rowan. Seraphine's breath caught. She hadn't been this close to her husband in months. He looked the same as always, tall, severe, perfectly controlled. But there was something new in his expression as he looked between her and the stranger. Something that might have been anger, though with Rowan it was always hard to tell. Lucien, Rowan said, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to say plague or pestilence. This is my wife, Lady Seraphine. Seraphine, my brother Lucien has apparently decided to inflict his presence on us. Brother. Seraphine had known Rowan had a younger brother. Everyone knew. Lucien Blackthorn, the wild second son who'd been sent away years ago after some scandal involving a minister's daughter and a carriage race that had ended with someone's greenhouse in flames. Rowan never spoke of him. Neither did anyone else in the keep, as if Lucien's very existence was another uncomfortable emotion to be locked away and forgotten. But here he was, larger than life and grinning at her like she was someone worth grinning at. Charmed, Lucien said, sweeping into an exaggerated bow. Truly, my brother has exceptional taste in architecture and absolutely terrible taste in how to treat a wife, but I suppose 1 out of 2 isn't bad. Lucien, Rowan's voice could have frozen the sun. What? I'm being honest. Look at her, Rowan. When's the last time you actually looked at your wife? The silence that fell over the room was different from the usual silence in Blackthorn Keep. This one had teeth. Rowan's jaw tightened. I suggest you remember where you are. Oh, I remember. I'm in the coldest house in England where my brother keeps his wife locked away like an embarrassment while he plays Lord of the Manor and pretends he doesn't have a heart. Seraphine found her voice. Please, you don't need to bitch, don't I? Lucien turned those bright, fierce eyes on her. How long has it been since anyone in this house treated you like a human being instead of a piece of furniture? She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up. Rowan stepped forward, and for a moment Seraphine thought he might actually strike his brother. His hands were clenched at his sides, his whole body rigid with barely contained fury. Get out! Lucien held his ground for another heartbeat, then shrugged. As you wish, Your Grace. He turned back to Seraphine and offered another bow, this one genuine. My lady, I hope we'll have a chance to speak again under better circumstances. Then he was gone, leaving Seraphine alone with her husband for the first time in longer than she could remember. Rowan didn't look at her. He was staring at the doorway through which Lucien had disappeared, breathing carefully, clearly fighting for the iron control that usually came so easily to him. I apologize for my brother's behavior, he said finally, his voice flat. He won't disturb you again. I wasn't disturbed. The words came out before she could stop them. Rowan's gaze snapped to her face, and she realized with a small shock that she couldn't remember the last time he'd truly looked at her either. Not past her, not through her, at her. He was rude, Rowan said. He was honest. Something flickered in Rowan's eyes. Anger, maybe, or something more complicated than anger. But before Seraphine could identify it, his face went blank again, smooth as stone. I have work to attend to, he said, and left. Seraphina sat alone in the morning room, her tea gone cold, her hands shaking slightly. For the first time in 8 years, something had changed in Blackthorn Keep. She wasn't sure if that terrified her or gave her hope. Over the next 3 days, Lucian Blackthorn turned the keep upside down. He didn't mean to, exactly. He simply existed in a way that was fundamentally incompatible with the suffocating order Rowan had imposed. He whistled in the hallways. He joked with the servants. He sprawled in chairs instead of sitting properly. He asked questions that no one asked in this house. Why is it so damn quiet? Why doesn't anyone smile? Why do you all act like you're living in a tomb? And he sought out Seraphine, not in any improper way. He simply treated her like a person who existed, who had thoughts worth hearing, who might want to do something other than sit alone in her chambers all day. The first time he appeared at her door with an invitation to walk in the gardens, such as they are, buried under 10 feet of snow, but the fresh air will do you good. She'd been too startled to refuse. They'd walked the covered paths, Lucien talking easily about his travels, the places he'd seen, the people he'd met. He didn't seem to expect her to respond. He just talked, filling the silence she'd become so accustomed to with stories and observations and the occasional outrageous joke. "You're very different from your brother," she'd said finally. Lucien had laughed. "Thank God for that. Rowan's been trying to turn himself into our father since he was 12 years old. Miserable bastard, our father. Brilliant military strategist, completely incapable of loving anything that couldn't be commanded or conquered." He'd glanced at her. "I'm sorry, you never met him?" "He died before I came here." "Lucky you, he would have hated you." Seraphine had stopped walking. "Why?" "Because you're kind." He couldn't stand kindness, thought it was weakness. Lucian's expression had grown serious for once. "Rowan thinks the same thing. He's wrong, but he'll probably never figure that out." She'd wanted to ask more, but Rowan himself had appeared at the end of the garden path, and Lucian had immediately shifted back into his mocking, careless persona. "Ah, brother, come to check that I'm not defiling your wife among the frozen rose bushes? I assure you, my tastes run to slightly warmer environments." Rowan's face had been unreadable. "The estate manager is here to see you about the Eastern holdings." "How thrilling. I'll be right there." But he'd turned to Seraphine first, offering a genuine smile. "Thank you for the company, my lady. It's been the most pleasant hour I've spent in this house in 15 years. After he'd left, Seraphine had stood alone in the garden with Rowan. The silence between them felt different now. Heavier. "You don't need to entertain him," Rowan had said. "I wasn't entertaining him. We were walking. He's here temporarily, until his creditors stop looking for him. Once his debts are settled, he'll leave again." "I see." Rowan had started to turn away, then stopped. "He's not—" He'd paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Lucien can be charming, but he's careless with everything, with everyone." "And you're careful," Seraphine had said quietly. "Yes. Is that better?" She hadn't meant it as a challenge, but Rowan had taken it as one. His jaw had tightened, and for a moment she'd thought he might actually answer, might actually have a real conversation with her about something that mattered. Instead, he'd simply said, "I have work to do," and walked away. That had been 2 days ago. Now Seraphine sat in the library, the one room in the keep she'd claimed as her own because Rowan never used it, trying to focus on a book she'd already read 3 times. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, snow fell in thick, heavy flakes that made the whole world seem muffled and distant. "Reading again?" She looked up to find Lucian leaning against the doorframe, that easy grin on his face. "It's one of the few pastimes available," she said. "Only if you're content to let my brother dictate your entire existence." He pushed away from the door and wandered into the library, examining the shelves with casual interest. "Have you always been this obedient?" "I'm not obedient. I'm practical." "Practical," he repeated, testing the word. "Is that what you call it when you disappear into the walls of this house and pretend you don't exist?" Seraphine set down her book. "What would you have me do instead? Fight with your brother? Demand things he has no intention of giving me? Make everyone in this household uncomfortable just to prove a point?" "Yes," Lucian said simply. "All of that. Because at least then you'd be living instead of just existing." "You don't understand. Don't I?" He turned to face her fully. "I grew up in this house, remember? I know exactly what it's like to live under Rowan's ice. The difference is, I got out. You're a man. You had that option. Fair point. He studied her for a moment, his expression more serious than she'd yet seen it. But you have options too. You just refuse to see them because you've convinced yourself this is what you deserve. The words hit harder than they should have. Seraphine stood up, her hands clenching around the book she'd been holding. You've been here less than a week. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know you've been crying. He said it gently, without mockery. Elspeth told me. She hears you at night, in your chambers. Not every night, but often enough. Shame burned through Seraphine's chest. She had no right. She's worried about you. Everyone is. The whole household walks on eggshells because they know you're miserable, and they know my brother is too stubborn or too scared to do anything about it. Rowan isn't scared of anything. Yes, he is. Lucian moved closer, his voice dropping. He's terrified. Our father beat any softness out of him before he was old enough to defend himself. Taught him that caring about people makes you vulnerable, that love is a weapon others will use against you. So Rowan built walls, and he's been hiding behind them so long he's forgotten how to be human. Then what am I supposed to do? The question came out raw, almost desperate. I can't force him to care about me. I can't make him want this marriage. I can't. She stopped, horrified that she'd said so much, that she'd let Lucian see how broken she really was. But he didn't laugh at her, didn't mock her. He just looked sad. You could leave, he said quietly. No, I couldn't. Why not? Because I made vows. Because my family would be disgraced. Because... She stopped, forcing herself to be honest. Because I'm afraid that if I leave, it means I'm giving up, admitting that 8 years of my life were wasted on a man who will never love me. They were wasted anyway, Lucian said. Not cruelly, just factually. The only question is whether you want to waste 8 more, or 18, or the rest of your life. Seraphine turned away from him, moving to the window. The snow was falling harder now, building drifts against the glass. Why do you care? She asked. Because someone should. His reflection appeared in the glass beside hers. And because I know what it's like to be told you're not good enough, that your feelings don't matter, that you should just shut up and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you're thrown. They stood in silence for a long moment. He watches you, Lucian said finally. Seraphine blinked. What? Rowan. He watches you when he thinks no one's looking. At dinner, in the halls. This morning I caught him staring at the door to your chambers like he wanted to knock but couldn't figure out how. Her heart did something painful in her chest. You're imagining things. Maybe. Or maybe my brother is just too much of a coward to admit he wants something he thinks he doesn't deserve. Lucian straightened, his usual lightness creeping back into his voice. Either way, you deserve better than this half-life. Remember that. He left her there, alone with her thoughts and the endless snow. That night, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the canopy above her, replaying Lucy's words over and over. He watches you. He wanted to knock, but couldn't figure out how. It was ridiculous. Rowan didn't want her. He'd made that clear 1,000 different ways over 8 years. If he'd wanted to be her husband, her real husband, he would have been. It was that simple. Except nothing about Rowan had ever been simple. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the morning room 3 days ago. The flash of something in his eyes when she'd said Lucian was honest. The careful distance he kept, as if afraid that getting too close might break whatever fragile control he maintained over himself. Love is a weapon others will use against you. Is that what Rowan thought? That caring about her would make him weak? The idea was absurd and heartbreaking in equal measure. Seraphine rolled onto her side, punching her pillow into a different shape as if that might help. It didn't. She was wide awake, her mind churning, her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Anger, maybe. Or grief. Or the terrible, dangerous thing called hope. She sat up, swinging her legs out of bed. Her chambers were cold despite the dying fire in the hearth. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. How much longer could she live like this? How much longer could either of them? Seraphine pressed her forehead against the cold glass and felt something break inside her. Just a small crack, just enough to let out the pressure that had been building for 8 years. She started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd learned to shed in silence. Real crying. The kind that shook her shoulders and made her breath come in gasps. 8 years of loneliness, of rejection, of slowly disappearing into the walls of this house. All of it poured out in ugly, wrenching sobs. She cried for the girl she'd been at 17, for the marriage she'd imagined, for every night she'd spent alone wondering what she'd done wrong, for the woman she'd become, so small and quiet and afraid of her own voice. She cried until her throat hurt and her eyes burned and she couldn't cry anymore. And then, when the tears finally stopped, she whispered his name. Rowan. Just once. Just to hear how it sounded when she said it, like she meant it, like she was calling to him, like she wanted him to hear her. She didn't know he was standing in the hallway outside her door, didn't know he'd been walking past, as he did sometimes when he couldn't sleep, and had frozen when he heard her crying. Didn't know he'd stood there for 10 minutes, his hand raised to knock, unable to make himself do it. Didn't know that when she whispered his name, it hit him like a physical blow. Inside her room, Seraphine wiped her eyes and climbed back into bed, exhausted and empty. In the hallway, Rowan Blackthorne stood in the darkness, his whole body trembling, trying to remember how to breathe. He'd heard his name spoken 1,000 ways in his life. With respect, with fear, with obedience, with hatred. But he'd never heard it like that, like a prayer, like a plea, like something pulled from the depths of a drowning woman's soul. And for the first time in 20 years, the Duke of Blackthorne felt his walls begin to crack. The next morning, everything looked different to Rowan. He sat at his desk, staring at papers he couldn't focus on, hearing Seraphine's voice over and over in his head, the way she'd said his name, the raw pain in it. He'd done that to her. Every year of loneliness, every night spent crying, every moment she'd felt unwanted, he'd done all of it. Not through cruelty, exactly. Through absence. Through the careful, deliberate distance he'd maintained to protect himself. Except it hadn't protected anyone. It had only created 2 people trapped in the same house, slowly dying in different rooms. You look like hell. Rowan glanced up to find Lucian lounging in the doorway of his study, examining his fingernails with elaborate disinterest. What do you want? To point out that you're an idiot, but I suspect you've already figured that out. Lucian pushed away from the doorframe and dropped into the chair across from Rowan's desk. How long were you standing outside her door last night? Rowan went very still. What are you talking about? Please. The servants see everything in this house. Mrs. Aldrich mentioned to Elspeth that she saw you in the west corridor at an unusual hour, looking like you'd seen a ghost. Lucian's casual demeanor dropped slightly. You heard her crying, didn't you? That's none of your concern. It becomes my concern when you're torturing a perfectly lovely woman for no reason other than you're afraid of your own feelings. I'm not afraid. You're terrified, Lucian interrupted, of being like our father, of caring about someone and having them used against you, of being weak. He leaned forward. But you know what's actually weak, Rowan? Letting fear control you, hiding from your own wife for 8 years because you're too much of a coward to admit you might actually care about her. Rowan's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain how it makes sense to marry someone and then treat them like they don't exist. Explain how that protects anyone. It protects her, Rowan said, the words rough. From me, from this family, from the weight of expectation and duty that destroyed our mother. Lucienne went quiet. They never talked about their mother. Never. She died when Lucienne was 6 and Rowan 12, broken by years of living with a man who'd treated her like a broodmare and a political asset rather than a human being. Seraphine isn't our mother, Lucian said finally. No, she's stronger, which is why I won't do to her what our father did to... Rowan stopped, pressing his palms flat against his desk. I won't become him. You already have. The words were gentle but devastating. You're alone in this study, pushing away everyone who tries to get close to you, convinced that control is the same thing as strength. That's exactly what he did. I'm nothing like him. Aren't you? He married a woman he didn't know how to love and made her miserable. You married a woman you're afraid to love and you're making her miserable. Different methods, same result. Rowan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. Get out! No. Lucian stayed seated, his gaze steady. Not until you admit that you're destroying your own life because you're afraid. Not until you acknowledge that the woman sleeping down the hall from you deserves better than this. That you both do. You have no right. I have every right. Because I'm watching my brother waste his life hiding from the one thing that might actually make him happy. Because I've made enough mistakes in my own life to recognize when someone else is making them too. Lucian stood facing Rowan across the desk. You want to know what's really happening here? You're punishing Seraphine for the crime of making you feel something, for getting past your walls without even trying, for being the kind of person who could matter to you if you let her. She doesn't matter to me. Liar. Lucian's voice was flat. You stood outside her door last night listening to her cry. You watch her when you think no one's looking. You banished me from the morning room the other day because you couldn't stand seeing me make her smile. She matters to you. You're just too stubborn to admit it. Rowan wanted to deny it, wanted to throw his brother out of his study and go back to the careful, controlled life he'd built. The life where he didn't have to feel anything. But he couldn't. Because Lucien was right. Seraphine mattered. She'd always mattered, from the moment she'd walked into this keep 8 years ago with hope in her eyes. He'd seen that hope die slowly, day by day, year by year, killed by his deliberate neglect. And he'd told himself it was necessary. That distance was protection. But last night, hearing her cry, hearing her whisper his name like it was something precious she'd been holding on to. What am I supposed to do? The question came out broken. Lucien's expression softened. Talk to her. Really talk to her. Tell her the truth. The truth is I'm not capable of giving her what she needs. The truth is you're afraid to try. Lucien moved around the desk, putting a hand on Rowan's shoulder. But you're going to lose her anyway, either because she finally finds the courage to leave, or because she fades away completely in this house. So you might as well take the risk. He left Rowan alone in the study, surrounded by papers and duty and the crushing weight of everything he'd been avoiding for 8 years. Seraphine was in the music room when Rowan found her. She was sitting at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys without pressing them, playing some song only she could hear. She did that sometimes, came here to touch the instrument she'd once loved, remembering what it felt like to make music. She'd stopped playing aloud 3 years ago. The sound had seemed too loud in the silent keep, too much like joy in a place where joy wasn't welcome. Seraphine. She jumped, spinning around on the bench. Rowan stood in the doorway, and for a moment she couldn't read his expression at all. He looked tired, strained, almost uncertain, which was impossible because Rowan was never uncertain about anything. I'm sorry, she said automatically. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. You're not disturbing anyone. He took a step into the room, then another. I heard you play once, years ago. Mozart, I think. She stared at him. You were listening? I was working in the study. The walls are thinner than you'd think. He was quiet for a moment. Why did you stop? The question caught her off guard. It seemed inappropriate. To make noise. Inappropriate, he repeated. Something that might have been pain crossed his face. You thought it was inappropriate to play music in your own home. It isn't my home. Not really. It's yours. Ours. The word came out rough, like he wasn't used to saying it. This is your home, Seraphine. It's supposed to be anyway. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what was happening. Rowan didn't seek her out. Rowan didn't have conversations with her about things that mattered. This was wrong somehow, off balance, like the world had tilted slightly sideways. Are you ill? She asked. He almost smiled. It was gone so fast she might have imagined it, but for a second something that wasn't quite amusement touched his eyes. No, He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. I need to talk to you. Her stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to tell her to leave, to go back to her family, to admit their marriage was the failure everyone knew it was. She stood up from the piano bench, forcing herself to meet his gaze. All right. Not here. He glanced toward the hallway, where servants could be anywhere listening. Walk with me. It wasn't a request exactly, but it wasn't an order either. Seraphine nodded and followed him out of the music room, through the keep's winding corridors, until they reached the covered walk that led to the gardens. The snow had stopped falling, leaving everything white and still. Their breath misted in the cold air as they walked in silence. Rowan's hands clasped behind his back, Seraphine's arms wrapped around herself. "I heard you last night," he said finally. Her blood froze. "What?" "Crying. I was—" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I was passing your chambers and I heard you." Shame burned through her. "I'm sorry. I tried to be quiet." "Don't apologize." His voice was sharp. Not angry, exactly. Something else. "Don't ever apologize for that. This is—" He broke off, jaw working. "This is my fault. All of it." Seraphine could only stare at him. "I've been cruel to you," Rowan continued, the words coming out like they hurt. "Not intentionally, not with anger, but through neglect, through distance, through treating you like you were an obligation instead of—" He stopped again, and she realized with shock that his hands were shaking. "Instead of what?" she whispered. "Instead of my wife." He looked at her directly, and she saw something raw in his eyes, something unguarded. "I told myself I was protecting you, that keeping distance between us would keep you safe from the weight of this family's expectations, from the kind of marriage that destroyed my mother, but I was lying to myself." "Rowan, I was protecting me," he said, "from feeling anything, from caring about someone enough that losing them could destroy me. My father taught me that love was weakness, and I believed him. So when you came here, young and hopeful and kind, I panicked, because you were exactly the kind of person who could matter to me, who could get past every wall I'd built." Seraphine's throat was tight. "So you pushed me away?" "Yes." "For 8 years?" "Yes." She turned away from him, her mind reeling. All this time she'd thought she was the problem, that she wasn't good enough, wasn't beautiful enough, wasn't interesting enough to deserve his attention. But it had never been about her inadequacy at all. It had been about his fear. "Do you have any idea," she said quietly, "how many nights I lay awake trying to figure out what I'd done wrong?" "I know." "How many times I changed myself hoping you might notice?" "I know." "How completely alone I've felt in this house." "I know." His voice cracked. "Seraphine, I know, and I can't. There's nothing I can say that will make any of it right. No apology that will give you back the 8 years I stole from you." She turned to face him again and was startled to see genuine anguish in his expression. "Then why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because I heard you say my name." The words were barely audible. "And I realize that I'm going to lose you. If not today, then soon. Because you deserve so much more than I've given you. Because eventually you'll find the strength to leave and I won't have the right to stop you. Because my brother is right. I am a coward. But even cowards can change. Even cowards can try." Seraphine felt tears burning in her eyes. "Try to do what?" "To be the husband you deserve. To build the marriage we should have had from the beginning. To stop hiding behind duty and fear and pretending I don't—" He stopped, closing his eyes. "Pretending I don't care." The words hung between them in the cold air. "Do you?" she whispered. "Care?" Rowan opened his eyes and looked at her, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw him. Not the Duke, not the cold, controlled master of Blackthorn Keep. Just a man, terrified and honest and more vulnerable than she'd ever imagined he could be. "Yes," he said. "I do." And then, before either of them could think better of it, before fear could reassert its grip, he reached out and took her hand. It was such a small gesture, such an ordinary thing for a husband to do. But they'd never touched like this before. Never held hands, never sought each other's warmth. His hand was warm, solid, slightly calloused from riding. Seraphine looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerous and painful and terrifyingly like hope. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "I know. I don't know if I can trust you not to hurt me again." "I know that too." "Then what are you asking me?" Rowan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "For a chance. To prove that I can be different. That we can be different. That this marriage can be something other than two people slowly freezing to death in the same house." Seraphine wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But 8 years of rejection had taught her to be careful, to guard her heart against hope. "And if you can't change?" she asked. "If this is just another cruelty, giving me hope and then taking it away?" "Then you leave," he said simply. "And I won't stop you. I'll give you whatever you need, money, support, help with your family. You'll be free. I'm already free to leave. No, you're not. Your family would be disgraced. Society would destroy you. I would make sure that doesn't happen. Whatever you decide, Seraphine, you won't be trapped anymore. She studied his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was some new game he was playing. But all she saw was honesty, raw, painful honesty from a man who clearly wasn't used to being honest about his feelings. One chance, she said finally. Relief flooded his expression. Thank you. I mean it, Rowan. One chance. If you disappear back into your study and pretend this conversation never happened, if you go back to treating me like furniture, I will leave. I'll find a way. I don't care what it costs. I understand. Do you? She pulled her hand from his, needing the distance to think clearly. Because I've survived 8 years of loneliness. I've made peace with it. I've built a life inside those walls, even if it's not the life I wanted. But I can't survive hope and then rejection. Not again. It would break something in me that can't be fixed. Then I won't reject you. He said it with the same absolute certainty he brought to every decision. I'm done running from this. From you. From what I feel. And what do you feel? The question hung between them. Rowan looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump. I feel like I've been half dead for 8 years, he said. And last night, hearing you cry, hearing you say my name like it mattered, I realized I don't want to be dead anymore. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even close to what she'd once dreamed of hearing from her husband. But it was honest, real, more than he'd ever given her before. All right, Seraphine said softly. All right? One chance, we'll try. But Rowan, she met his eyes. I need you to understand something. I'm not the girl I was when I came here. I'm not soft and hopeful and easy to hurt anymore. You made sure of that. So if we do this, we do it as equals. I won't be your silent, obedient wife who exists only when you remember to acknowledge her. Something fierce came into his expression. Pride, maybe. Or respect. Good, he said. I don't want an obedient wife. I want... He stopped, then made himself finish. I want you. The real you. However that looks. Seraphine felt her breath catch. They stood there in the cold garden, two people who'd been strangers in the same house for 8 years, trying to figure out how to be something other than broken. This won't be easy, she said. I know. People will talk. Your aunt will be furious. The servants won't know what to make of it. Let them talk. He offered his hand again. Seraphine, I've spent 8 years caring what everyone else thinks. I'm done with that. She looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, weighing the risk, weighing the cost of hope against the safety of resignation. Then she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and for the first time in 8 years, Seraphine Blackthorne felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. They walked back to the keep together, hand in hand, while snow began to fall again over Blackthorne Keep. Inside, Lucien watched from an upstairs window and permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. Some walls were worth breaking down, even if you had to use a sledgehammer to do it. The change didn't happen overnight. Seraphine had been foolish enough to believe in fairy tales once before, and she wasn't about to make that mistake again. The morning after their conversation in the garden, she woke expecting to find everything back to normal. Rowan locked away in his study, herself alone at breakfast, the whole fragile moment of honesty buried under the weight of 8 years of habit. But when she came down to the morning room, Rowan was already there. He stood by the window, still dressed in his riding clothes, clearly having just come in from the stables. When he heard her enter, he turned and something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the kind of nervousness that looked strange on a man who commanded entire estates with absolute authority. "Good morning," he said. Seraphine stopped in the doorway. "Good morning." They stared at each other for a moment, both clearly unsure what came next. "I asked the kitchen to prepare eggs," Rowan said finally. "Elspeth mentioned you might like them, but never ordered them because—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "I should have noticed what you ate, what you wanted. I didn't." "No," Seraphine agreed quietly. "You didn't." He nodded, accepting that. "I'm noticing now. It was such a small thing. Eggs for breakfast." But Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest anyway, Because small things had always mattered more than grand gestures. Small things were what made a life. She moved into the room and sat down at the table. After a moment's hesitation, Rowan sat across from her. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had ruled this house for 8 years. Less empty. Less cold. Just two people who didn't quite know how to talk to each other yet, but were at least willing to try. Elspeth brought in fresh tea, her eyes going wide when she saw them sitting together. She recovered quickly, setting down the pot with professional efficiency, but Seraphine caught the small smile on her maid's face as she left. Word would spread through the household by noon. "I have estate business this morning," Rowan said, breaking the quiet. "But this afternoon, if you're amenable, I thought we might ride together. The weather's cleared." Seraphine set down her teacup carefully. "I haven't ridden in years." "I know. You stopped about 3 years ago." At her surprised look, he added, "I noticed. I just didn't. I should have asked why. You never rode with me. It seemed pointless to go alone." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Rowan didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, like he was cataloging each small wound he'd inflicted, adding it to some internal ledger of damage done. "I'd like to ride with you now," he said, "if you're willing." She wanted to say no. Wanted to protect herself against the possibility that this was temporary, that any day now he'd retreat back into his walls and leave her more alone than before. But she'd agreed to give him a chance, and chances required risk. "All right," she said. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. 2 o'clock then. He stood, clearly intending to leave for his study, then paused, turned back. And in a gesture so awkward it was almost endearing, he reached out and touched her shoulder briefly. "Thank you," he said. Then he was gone, leaving Seraphine alone with her eggs and her confusion and the strange, fragile thing growing in her chest that felt dangerously like hope. But Lucienne found her in the library an hour later, curled up in her usual chair with a book she wasn't reading. "So," he said, dropping into the seat across from her with his characteristic lack of ceremony, "I hear my brother actually joined you for breakfast. The servants are beside themselves. Mrs. Aldrich thinks she might be hallucinating. We ate eggs together. It's hardly revolutionary. In this house? It might as well be." He studied her face. "How are you doing with all this?" Seraphine closed her book. "I don't know. Terrified, mostly." "Of what?" "That it won't last. That he'll wake up tomorrow and decide it was all a mistake. That I'll let myself hope and then—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. Lucien's expression softened. "And then he'll break your heart again." "Yes. That's a reasonable fear." "Is it?" She looked at him. "You're the one who told me to give him a chance. I told you to demand better treatment. That's different from trusting him blindly." Lucien leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, my brother is genuine about this. I can tell. But he's also spent his entire adult life avoiding emotional intimacy like it's a disease. He's going to stumble. Probably often. The question is whether you can handle that without losing yourself again." "I don't know if I can." "Then set boundaries. Make it clear what you will and won't tolerate. Don't let him slide back into old patterns just because confrontation is uncomfortable." He paused. "You're stronger than you think, Seraphine. 8 years in this house and you haven't completely disappeared. That takes steel." She wanted to believe him. "And what about you? What about me? How long are you staying?" Lucien's easy smile faltered slightly. "Worried you'll lose your ally? Maybe. Or worried about what happens when the catalyst for all this change leaves." He was quiet for a moment. "I have to go back to London eventually. My creditors aren't going to forget about me just because I'm hiding in my brother's keep, but I'm not leaving until I'm sure Rowan won't revert to being a stone statue the moment I'm gone. And if he does, then you write to me, and I'll come back and knock some sense into him again." Lucien's grin returned. "One of the few advantages of being the disappointing younger brother. I have nothing to lose by causing scenes." Despite everything, Seraphine almost smiled. At 2 o'clock, she met Rowan at the stables. He'd chosen a gentle mare for her, not the spirited gelding she used to ride before she'd given up. The consideration stung and warmed her in equal measure. They rode out across the snow-covered grounds in silence. the horse's breath misting in the cold air. The sky was clear for once, pale blue and brittle looking, like glass that might crack if you touched it wrong. Rowan sat his horse with the same rigid control he brought to everything, but Seraphine noticed his hands weren't quite steady on the reins. He was nervous. Actually, nervous. The realization made something shift in her chest. "Do you remember," she said finally, "the first time we met?" He glanced at her. "The betrothal dinner. You barely looked at me." "I looked at you." His voice was quiet. "I just didn't let you see me doing it." "Why not?" He was silent for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because you were 17 years old and hopeful, and I knew I was going to disappoint you. It seemed kinder not to encourage expectations I couldn't meet." "That wasn't your decision to make." "I know that now." They rode on. The snow crunched under the horses' hooves. In the distance, Seraphine could see the edge of the forest that marked the boundary of the estate. "What changed?" she asked. "Between yesterday and today? Between 8 years of distance and suddenly wanting to try?" Rowan pulled his horse to a stop. After a moment, she did the same. "I heard you say my name," he said, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. "And I realized I'd spent 8 years trying not to care about you, telling myself it was for your protection, for your own good, that keeping distance would keep you safe from the weight of this family's expectations." He turned to look at her directly. "But the truth is simpler than that. I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of you." The admission seemed to cost him. "Of caring about someone enough that losing them could destroy me. My father loved my mother, in his way, and when she died, it broke something in him. He became harder, crueler, more focused on duty and legacy than anything human. I watched it happen, and I swore I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me." "So you made sure no one could get close?" "Yes." Seraphine's hands tightened on her reins. "And now? Now I'm realizing that trying to protect myself from loss just means I've already lost everything that matters." He met her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Seraphine. Not to death, not to divorce, not to the slow erosion of years spent as strangers. And I know I might anyway. I know this might not work, but at least I'll have tried." The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around them. Seraphine's mare shifted restlessly beneath her. "I need you to understand something," she said carefully. "I'm not the same person I was when I came here. You can't treat me like a project you're fixing or a debt you're repaying. If we do this, I need to matter, not as the Duchess, not as your duty, as myself." "You do matter. Prove it." The words came out harder than she'd intended. Not with grand gestures or apologies, with the small things. With showing up. With actually seeing me when you look at me. With treating me like someone whose thoughts and feelings are worth your time. "I will." "Don't promise what you can't deliver, Rowan. I've had enough broken promises to last a lifetime." He urged his horse closer to hers, close enough that their legs almost touched. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He looked older than 32, tired. "Then I won't promise," he said. "I'll just do it, every day, until you believe it." They rode back to the keep as the sun began its early winter descent. Neither of them spoke, but something had shifted between them. Some small seed of possibility planted in frozen ground. Whether it would grow or die remained to be seen. Fact. That evening, Rowan did something that shocked the entire household. He invited Seraphine to dine with him in the small private dining room instead of the formal hall. She arrived to find candles lit and a fire burning in the hearth. Nothing elaborate. No roses or music or any of the romantic gestures she'd once imagined. Just a quiet room and a table set for two. Rowan stood when she entered, another small courtesy that felt strange after years of being ignored. They sat. Servants brought food. And for the first time in 8 years, they had dinner together. It was awkward. Conversation came in fits and starts, punctuated by long silences that neither of them quite knew how to fill. But Rowan asked her questions about her day, about the book she'd been reading, about whether she'd heard from her family recently. And he actually listened to the answers. "My sister writes occasionally," Seraphine said, picking at her fish. "She married last year, a baron's third son. She seems happy." "You miss her?" "Sometimes." Seraphine set down her fork. "We were close when we were young, But after I came here, the letters became less frequent. I think my family was disappointed that I hadn't. She stopped. Hadn't given me an heir, Rowan finished quietly. The words hung between them, heavy with all the implications neither of them wanted to address. That was never your failure, Rowan said. It was mine. I came to your chambers so rarely that… He stopped, jaw working. I failed at every aspect of being a husband, including that one. Seraphine felt heat rise in her cheeks. They'd never discussed this, never acknowledged the physical aspect of their marriage, or rather, the lack of it. The handful of times in 8 years that Rowan had come to her bed had been perfunctory, awkward, clearly done out of duty rather than desire. Why didn't you want me? The question came out before she could stop it. Rowan went very still. That's not… It wasn't about wanting. Then what was it about? He stood abruptly, moving to the window. For a long moment he just stared out at the darkness, his shoulders rigid. I was afraid, he said finally, that if I let myself want you, I wouldn't be able to stop, that I'd become dependent, that you'd become a weakness someone could use against me. He turned to face her. So I made it clinical, made it about duty, kept it rare enough that I could pretend it didn't mean anything. And did it mean anything? Yes. The word was barely audible. Every time I had to force myself to leave afterward, to go back to my chambers instead of staying, to maintain distance instead of… He stopped, closing his eyes. I wanted to stay. I wanted to know you. I wanted all the things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. Seraphine's hands were shaking. She set them flat on the table, trying to steady herself. And now I'm done pretending I don't want those things. He came back to the table but didn't sit. But I won't push. I won't expect… Seraphine, I know I've given you no reason to want my touch, to want any kind of intimacy with me. So I'm asking what you need. What would make you feel safe? She looked up at him, this man who was her husband in name only, who was trying so hard to be something different and clearly had no idea how to do it. Time, she said. I need time. To trust that this is real, that you won't disappear back into your study and pretend none of this happened. How much time? I don't know. Maybe a lot. Maybe… She stopped, forcing herself to be honest. 8 years is a long time to feel unwanted, Rowan. You can't undo that in a week. I know. And I can't just forget it, can't just pretend it didn't happen because you're sorry now. I'm not asking you to forget. He finally sat down again, across from her. I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be different, that we can be different. Then prove it. She met his eyes. Show me you can be patient, that you can be present, that you can think about someone other than yourself. I will. They finished dinner in silence, but it wasn't the cold silence of before. It was the complicated silence of two people trying to figure out how to build something new from the ruins of something that had never really existed in the first place. When Seraphine rose to leave, Rowan stood as well. Good night, she said. Good night. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for giving me this chance. She nodded and left, walking back to her chambers through the quiet halls of the keep. Behind her closed door, she leaned against the wood and tried to catch her breath. This was real. This was actually happening. Rowan was trying. The question was whether trying would be enough. The next few days established a new pattern. Rowan joined her for breakfast each morning. They rode together in the afternoons when weather permitted. They dined together most evenings, though sometimes his work kept him late, and he sent word rather than simply not appearing. The small courtesies added up. He asked her opinions on household matters. He listened when she spoke. He remembered details. That she preferred tea to coffee. That she disliked oysters. That she'd once mentioned wanting to see the library in London. But it was still awkward. Still stilted. Years of distance couldn't be erased by a few shared meals, and the household noticed everything. The staff is placing bets, Lucian informed her one afternoon, sprawling across the sofa in the library while she tried to read. Mrs. Aldrich thinks it'll last a month before Rowan reverts to type. The stable master is more optimistic. He's giving it 3 months. Only Elspeth believes it might actually stick. That's reassuring, Seraphine said dryly. I'm with Elspeth for what it's worth. Rowan's too stubborn to fail once he's committed to something. Lucian studied her. The question is whether you can handle the slow pace. My brother doesn't do anything quickly. I noticed. It's going to take time, real time, possibly years before this feels natural instead of forced. I know. And you're all right with that? Seraphine set down her book. I don't know what I am, Lucian. Some days I think this might actually work. Other days I'm just waiting for him to remember why he kept his distance in the first place and go back to ignoring me. Has he given you reason to think that? Recently, I mean? No. He's been... She paused, searching for the right word. Present. Attentive. Almost too attentive, like he's trying to make up for 8 years in a few weeks. That sounds exhausting. It is. For both of us, I think. She rubbed her temples. Yesterday he asked if I wanted to reorganize the music room, if I wanted to change anything in the house to make it feel more mine. And I didn't know how to answer because for 8 years this place has been his. And now suddenly I'm supposed to have opinions about furniture? You're allowed to have opinions about furniture. I know that, but it feels like a test, like he's waiting to see if I'll ask for too much. Lucian sat up, his expression serious. Has he said that? Has he implied there are limits to what you can request? No, that's what makes it worse. He seems genuinely willing to change things, and I don't know how to trust that. Then start small. Ask for one thing. See how he responds. Build from there. Seraphine considered that. What would you ask for? Me? I'd ask for separate buildings entirely, but I'm not the one married to him. Lucian grinned. Though, if you do redecorate, might I suggest fewer stone walls and more colors that don't evoke dungeons? Despite herself, Seraphine smiled. That evening at dinner, she decided to take Lucian's advice. I'd like to start playing the piano again, she said, breaking a comfortable silence. Properly, with sound. Rowan looked up from his plate. Of course. You don't need my permission for that. I know, but I wanted to tell you, in case the music bothers you. It won't. How do you know? Because I like hearing you play. At her surprised expression, he added, I told you. I used to listen. When you still played years ago, it was... He paused, searching for words. It made the house feel less empty. Seraphine felt something warm bloom in her chest. Then why didn't you ever say anything? I should have. I didn't because I was trying to maintain distance, and acknowledging that I enjoyed something about you would have undermined that. He set down his fork. But I'm not maintaining distance anymore. So yes, please play. Fill this house with music if you want to. She nodded slowly. All right, I will. They finished eating, and when Seraphine rose to leave, Rowan surprised her by asking, Would you play something now, if you're willing? Her heart did something complicated. Now? Only if you want to. I don't want to push it. No, I'd like that. They walked together to the music room. Seraphine sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys after years of silence. She was rusty, stumbling over passages she used to know by heart. But Rowan settled into a chair near the fire and just listened, his expression unreadable but not cold. She played Mozart, the same piece he'd mentioned hearing years ago, and as the notes filled the room, she felt something shift, some small wall coming down between them. When she finished, Rowan didn't applaud or offer false praise. He just said, Thank you. And somehow, that was enough. Act. The turning point came 5 days later. Rowan's aunt, Lady Cordelia Blackthorne, arrived at the keep unannounced. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of aristocratic bearing that made servants scramble and nobles defer. She'd never approved of Seraphine, had made that clear from their first meeting 8 years ago. Too common, she'd said within Seraphine's hearing. Pretty enough, I suppose, but lacking the bloodline or the backbone for this family. Seraphine had been terrified of her then. She was less terrified now, though Cordelia still made her feel small and inadequate. The family gathered for dinner that evening. Seraphine, Rowan, Lucian, and Cordelia. The atmosphere was tense from the start. I hear you've been making changes, Rowan, Cordelia said, her tone suggesting she'd heard about much more than changes to furniture. The servants are gossiping. The servants always gossip, Rowan said mildly. They say you've been spending time with your wife. She said wife, like it was a curiosity. Dining together, riding together. all very domestic. We are married. Yes, but you've never acted like it before. One wonders what prompted this sudden attack of sentimentality. The air in the room went cold. Seraphine kept her eyes on her plate, her stomach churning. My relationship with my wife is not your concern, Rowan said, his voice taking on an edge. Everything in this family is my concern. Your father entrusted me with, my father is dead. Rowan set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. And his opinions on my marriage died with him. Cordelia's eyes narrowed. Don't be crude, Rowan. I'm simply pointing out that this household has functioned perfectly well for 8 years with a certain understanding in place. Changing that understanding now will only lead to complications. What understanding? Seraphine heard herself ask. The table went silent. Cordelia turned her sharp gaze on Seraphine, looking faintly surprised that she'd spoken. The understanding, Cordelia said slowly, that this marriage serves a political purpose, that you provide the family with heirs when required and otherwise maintain a dignified distance. It's worked well enough so far. It hasn't worked at all, Seraphine said quietly. Hasn't it? You have a position, security, a household to manage. I have nothing. The words came out stronger than she'd intended. I've had nothing for 8 years except loneliness and the constant weight of knowing I'm unwanted here. Cordelia's expression hardened. How dramatic. Many women would be grateful for your position. Then they're welcome to it. Seraphine stood, her chair scraping back. Excuse me. She left before anyone could respond, walking quickly through the halls to her chambers. Behind her, she heard raised voices, Rowan and Cordelia arguing, but she didn't stop. Inside her room, she pressed her hands against the door and tried to catch her breath. Her whole body was shaking. She'd never confronted Cordelia before, never defended herself, never made waves, but she was tired of making herself small to fit into this family's expectations. A knock came at her door. She ignored it. Seraphine, Rowan's voice, quiet but firm. Please, let me in. She almost didn't, almost told him to leave. But she'd promised to give him a chance, and chances required communication even when it was hard. She opened the door. Rowan stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. Are you all right? No. He nodded slowly, accepting that. May I come in? It was the first time he'd asked to enter her chambers since their wedding night 8 years ago. Seraphine stepped back, letting him pass. He moved to the window, keeping distance between them, giving her space. I'm sorry, he said, for my aunt, for putting you in that position. You didn't put me there. She did. I allowed it. I've allowed her to treat you poorly for years because I was too cowardly to defend you. He turned to face her. That ends now. I've told her she's no longer welcome here until she can speak to you with respect. Seraphine stared at him. You did what? I told her to leave. She's returning to London in the morning. Rowan, she's family. She disrespected my wife. His voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. In my house, after I'd made it clear that things were changing, I won't tolerate that. Not from her. Not from anyone. Something cracked open in Seraphine's chest. For 8 years, she'd defended herself because no one else would. But here was Rowan, actually standing up for her, actually choosing her over family politics and expectations. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me for basic decency. He moved slightly closer. But I need you to know what my aunt said about heirs and duty and political marriages. That's not what I want. Not anymore. What do you want? You. The word was simple, direct. Not as a duchess or a vessel for the family legacy. Just you. However that looks, whatever that means. Seraphine felt tears burning in her eyes. I don't know how to believe that. Then let me prove it. He took another step closer. Every day. For as long as it takes. They stood in her chambers barely 2 feet apart, closer than they'd been since their wedding night. And for the first time, Seraphine didn't feel afraid of that proximity. Didn't feel the need to protect herself against the possibility of rejection. All right, she said softly. Rowan reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm going to fix this, he said. Fix us. I don't care how long it takes. She leaned into his touch, just slightly, just enough to let him know she was trying too. And in the cold stone keep that had been a prison for 8 years, something warm and fragile and stubborn began to grow. They stayed like that for a long moment, Rowan's hand warm against her face, both of them breathing carefully like they were standing on ice that might crack at any second. Then he stepped back, letting his hand fall away, and the loss of contact felt almost physical. "I should go," he said. "It's late." Seraphine nodded, not trusting her voice. But at the door he paused. "Would you?" He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "Would you consider moving into the Duchess's chambers, the main suite connected to mine?" Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because separate wings of the house made sense when we were strangers. But if we're trying to build something real, it seems." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not asking you to share my bed, just to be closer. So we're not living on opposite ends of the keep like we're avoiding each other." "We were avoiding each other." "I know, but I don't want to anymore." His jaw tightened. "If it's too much too soon, tell me. I'll understand." Seraphine thought about it. The Duchess's chambers had been empty since Rowan's mother died. She'd never even seen them, had accepted without question that they weren't meant for her. That she was meant to stay in the small guest room where she'd been placed 8 years ago and never invited to leave. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Relief flickered across his face. "That's all I ask." After he left, Seraphine lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Everything was changing so fast. Too fast, maybe. 3 weeks ago, she'd been resigned to a lifetime of loneliness, and now Rowan was asking her to move into chambers connected to his, defending her against his aunt, touching her face like she was something precious. It felt real. That was what scared her most. It felt real enough that losing it might actually destroy her. The next morning, Lady Cordelia left in a fury, her carriage disappearing down the drive in a cloud of snow and indignation. Seraphine watched from the library window, feeling Lucian's presence behind her. "That's going to cause problems," he said. "I know. She'll go back to London and tell everyone that Rowan's lost his mind, that his common wife has bewitched him, that the Blackthorne family is falling apart." "I know that too." Seraphine turned to face him. "Should I have kept quiet? Let her say whatever she wanted?" "No." Lucian's expression was serious. "You did exactly what you needed to do, and Rowan did what he should have done 8 years ago. But there will be consequences. Society doesn't forgive nobles who choose their wives over family politics. He's a duke. What can they do to him? Isolate him, refuse invitations, make it clear that he's broken some unwritten code by actually caring about his marriage." Lucien moved to stand beside her at the window. "My brother has spent his entire life building a reputation as the perfect duke, disciplined, controlled, above emotion. Throwing that away for you is going to cost him. Then maybe he shouldn't—" "Don't!" Lucien cut her off. "Don't make his choices for him. If he's decided you're worth the cost, let him prove it. Just be aware that the next few months are going to be difficult." Seraphine wrapped her arms around herself. "I never wanted to cause problems for him. You haven't caused anything. He caused this by treating you poorly for 8 years and then finally waking up to what he'd done." Lucian's voice softened. "This is on him, Seraphine, all of it. The only question is whether he has the spine to see it through." That evening, Rowan found her in the music room. She was playing Chopin badly, her fingers stumbling over passages that should have been second nature. "I spoke with the steward," he said, not bothering with preamble, "about the Duchess's chambers. They'll need cleaning and updating. They haven't been used in 20 years. But if you'd like to see them, decide what changes you want made, we could go now." Seraphine's hand stilled on the keys. "Now? Unless you're not ready." She stood slowly, smoothing her skirts. "Let's go." He led her through corridors she rarely used, toward the main family wing. The Duchess's chambers were adjacent to the Duke's suite, connected by a door that could be locked from either side. Rowan unlocked it with a key he produced from his pocket. The rooms were beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light. Furniture sat covered in dust cloths like ghosts. The air smelled stale, unused. But the bones of it were good. High ceilings, a massive four-poster bed, windows that would let in light if the curtains were opened. "My mother decorated these rooms when she married my father," Rowan said quietly. "After she died, he had them sealed, told the servants never to open them again. Why? Because looking at them reminded him of what he'd lost. Rowan moved to one of the windows, pulling back the curtain. Light spilled in, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. He loved her, in his way. And when she died, it broke something in him, made him harder, more focused on duty than humanity. Seraphine joined him at the window. You're afraid of becoming him. I already have in some ways. The control, the distance, the belief that emotion is weakness. He turned to look at her. But I'm trying to be different, to do what he couldn't. Which is? Let myself love someone without being destroyed by the possibility of loss. The word hung between them. Love. He hadn't said he loved her, not exactly, but the implication was there, terrifying and real. I don't know what to do with that, Seraphine said honestly. Neither do I. He managed something that might have been a smile. We'll figure it out together. She looked around the chambers again, trying to imagine herself here. Trying to imagine waking up knowing Rowan was just through that connecting door instead of 3 corridors away. I'll move in, she said, but I want to redecorate. Make it mine, not your mother's shrine. Whatever you want. And the connecting door stays locked until... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Until you're ready, Rowan finished for her. I understand. Over the next 2 weeks, the Duchess's chambers were transformed. Seraphine worked with a nervous efficiency born from years of having no control over her environment. She ordered new curtains in deep blue instead of the faded rose, had the old carpet replaced with something softer, brought in her books from the guest room, her small collection of paintings, everything that made a space feel lived in rather than preserved. The servants watched with barely concealed shock. Some approved. Others whispered that she was overstepping, that the new Duchess was getting ideas above her station now that the Duke was paying attention to her. Seraphine tried not to care about the whispers, tried to focus on the fact that for the first time in 8 years, she was making choices about her own life. Lucienne helped, offering opinions on furniture placement and mocking her taste in art with the kind of casual affection that felt like friendship. You're really doing this, he said one afternoon, watching her direct servants on where to place a new writing desk. Doing what? Claiming your place here, actually believing you deserve it. Seraphine adjusted a picture frame on the mantel. I'm trying. It suits you. The confidence. He grinned. Rowan's not going to know what hit him. Rowan invited this. He's the one who wanted me to move. Wanting it and handling the reality of it are different things. My brother spent 8 years carefully not thinking about you as a real person. Now you're going to be right there, impossible to ignore. It's going to mess with his head. Good, Seraphine said, surprising herself with the vehemence. He messed with mine for 8 years. Turnabout seems fair. Lucienne laughed, delighted. There she is, the woman who told my aunt off at dinner. I was wondering when she'd show up again. That night, Seraphine slept in the Duchess's chambers for the first time. The bed was enormous, the room unfamiliar, and she lay awake for hours listening to the strange creaks and settling sounds of this part of the keep. But underneath the strangeness was something else, a sense of belonging, of taking up space, of mattering. She was still awake when she heard movement from the other side of the connecting door. Footsteps, a pause, then silence. Rowan, she realized, in his own chambers, probably lying awake just like her, separated by a door and 8 years of damage. She pressed her hand flat against the wood, wondering if he could sense her there, wondering if he was doing the same thing on his side. After a long moment, she pulled away and went back to bed. Small steps. That's what they'd agreed on. Small steps toward something neither of them quite knew how to build. The scandal hit London society like a thunderclap 10 days later. Lady Cordelia had apparently wasted no time spreading her version of events. Letters arrived from distant relatives expressing concern about Rowan's judgment. Invitations to social events were quietly rescinded. Word filtered back through the servants' network that the Blackthorne family was being discussed in drawing rooms across London, and not favorably. The Duke has lost his senses over a nobody, one letter said, written by a cousin Rowan barely knew. Throwing out Lady Cordelia and elevating that girl beyond her station will only lead to ruin. Rowan read the letters in his study, his expression unreadable. Seraphine stood by the window, her stomach churning with guilt. "This is my fault," she said. "No, it's mine." He set down another letter without finishing it. "I knew this would happen. I chose it anyway." "But your reputation?" "My reputation was built on being cold and controlled and above human feeling. If losing that reputation means I get to have an actual marriage, I'll take the trade." "Your aunt is telling people I've manipulated you, that I'm—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "That you're what?" Rowan stood, moving toward her. "Common, ambitious, manipulative. She's been saying those things for 8 years. The only difference now is that I'm not pretending not to hear them." Seraphine turned to face him. "People will think less of you. Let them." He was close enough now that she could see the determination in his eyes. "I've spent my entire life worrying about what people think, what my father would think, what society expects. It hasn't made me happy. It hasn't made you happy. So I'm done with it." "Just like that? You're just done caring about your position?" "I still care about the estate, about the tenants, about my duties as a landowner, but my private life? My marriage?" He shook his head. "That's not up for public approval anymore." Footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Lucien appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "We have a problem," he said. "Another one?" Rowan's voice was dry. "The Earl of Westmarch is here, unannounced, and he's brought his daughter." Seraphine felt her stomach drop. The Earl of Westmarch was one of the most powerful nobles in England, and his daughter Victoria was renowned as one of the most eligible women in society. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for exactly the kind of political marriage the nobility expected. "Why is he here?" Rowan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "To make you an offer, I'd imagine. Now that word's out that your marriage is troubled, he probably thinks, my marriage isn't troubled. He doesn't know that. No one does. All they know is that you've never acted like a proper husband before, and now suddenly you're making changes. To some people, that looks like the beginning of the end." Lucien glanced at Seraphine. "They think you're on your way out, and Victoria is on her way in." The words hit like a physical blow. Seraphine had known, intellectually, that divorce was possible, that if their reconciliation failed, Rowan could set her aside and marry someone more suitable. But hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm not divorcing my wife to marry Victoria Westmarch," Rowan said flatly. "You should probably tell the Earl that," Lucien suggested. "He's waiting in the drawing room with Victoria, and enough luggage to suggest he's planning to stay a while." Rowan cursed under his breath, something Seraphine had never heard him do before, and headed for the door. Then he stopped, turning back to her. "Come with me," he said. "What?" "Come with me. When I speak to the Earl, I want him to see us together." Seraphine's first instinct was to refuse, to hide in her chambers and let Rowan handle the awkward social situation alone. But that was what the old Seraphine would have done. The woman who made herself invisible to avoid discomfort. She wasn't that woman anymore. "All right," she said. They walked to the drawing room together, Rowan's hand hovering near the small of her back in a gesture of support that didn't quite touch. Lucien trailed behind them, looking like he was expecting entertainment. The Earl of Westmarch stood when they entered, a tall man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and an air of entitlement. Beside him sat his daughter Victoria, who was every bit as lovely as rumor claimed, blonde, delicate-featured, dressed in a traveling outfit that probably cost more than Seraphine's entire wardrobe. Victoria's eyes widened slightly when she saw Seraphine, then narrowed with assessment. "Duke Blackthorne," the Earl said warmly, moving forward with his hand extended. "Thank you for receiving us on such short notice." "I wasn't aware I had a choice," Rowan said, shaking his hand briefly. "My steward said you arrived unannounced. Forgive the intrusion. When I heard about the situation here, I thought it best to come in person rather than write." "What situation?" The Earl's gaze flicked to Seraphine, dismissive and pointed. "The matter of your marriage, of course. Lady Cordelia informed me of the difficulties. I thought perhaps I could offer some counsel." "My marriage doesn't require counsel." "No? But surely you must see that this current arrangement is untenable. A wife who cannot provide heirs, who lacks the proper breeding for her position. These are not small matters, Blackthorne. They affect the entire family line." Seraphine felt her face heat with humiliation. Beside her, Rowan went very still. "You're speaking about my wife," he said quietly. Too quietly. "I'm speaking about a situation that could be resolved with minimal scandal, given the right approach." The Earl glanced at Victoria, who smiled demurely. "My daughter has been educated specifically for a position such as yours. Impeccable bloodline, proper training, and she's already been presented at court. A marriage between our families would strengthen both lines considerably." "I'm already married." "A condition that can be remedied. Annulment proceedings are delicate, but with the right pressure applied." "Get out." The Earl stopped mid-sentence. "I beg your pardon?" "Get out of my house." Rowan's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "Take your daughter, your luggage, and your presumptions, and leave. Now." "Blackthorn, you're not thinking clearly. The scandal is you arriving uninvited to suggest I discard my wife like she's defective merchandise." Rowan moved to stand beside Seraphine, his presence solid and protective. "This is Lady Seraphine Blackthorn, Duchess of Blackthorn, mistress of this household. She is my wife, not a placeholder, not a problem to be solved. My wife." Victoria's cheeks flushed pink. The Earl's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake," he said stiffly. "I've made plenty of mistakes. Marrying Seraphine wasn't one of them. The mistake was treating her poorly for 8 years. I'm correcting that now. Society will not look kindly on this." "Society can go straight to hell," Rowan said, and the Earl actually recoiled at the profanity. "You have 10 minutes to be off my property. After that, I'm having you removed." The Earl drew himself up, clearly about to launch into another argument, but Victoria touched his arm. "Father," she said softly, "we should go." She looked at Seraphine as she stood, and there was something in her eyes that might have been sympathy or might have been contempt. Either way, it made Seraphine's skin prickle. "You're a fool, Blackthorn," the Earl said as he moved toward the door. "Choosing sentiment over sense. It'll ruin you." "Then I'll be ruined with my wife beside me. I can live with that." After they left, the drawing room fell silent. Lucien was the first to speak. "Well," he said, "that was more entertaining than I expected. Rowan actually used profanity. I'm touched." "Not now," Rowan said. "Right. I'll just leave you two alone then." Lucien disappeared, closing the door behind him. Seraphine stared at Rowan, her heart pounding. "You sent them away." "Of course I did. But Victoria Westmarch she's everything I'm not. Perfect breeding, court connections, the kind of wife a duke is supposed to have. I don't want the kind of wife a duke is supposed to have." Rowan turned to face her fully. "I want you. How many times do I need to say it before you believe me?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "As many times as it takes, I suppose." He moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I'm not going anywhere, Seraphine. I'm not trading you in for a more suitable model. I'm not going to wake up one day and decide this was all a mistake. You're my wife, the only wife I want. And if the entire world thinks I'm insane for that, fine. Let them think it." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and embarrassing. The Earl was right about one thing. "I haven't given you an heir." "I don't care. You should care. The family line has survived for 300 years. It'll survive whether or not I produce another duke." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "And if we do have children someday, it'll be because we want them, not because society demands it." "Someday," she repeated softly. "When you're ready. If you're ever ready. There's no pressure, Seraphine. There's just us trying to figure this out." She leaned into his touch, letting herself believe him, letting herself hope that maybe, just maybe, this was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me, even when it cost you." "It doesn't cost me anything that matters." He pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling. "You're the first thing I've chosen for myself in 20 years. Everything else was duty or expectation or fear. But you're mine because I want you to be. That's not a cost. It's a gift." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the empty drawing room while snow fell outside and the rest of the world judged them from a distance. That night, Seraphine lay in the Duchess's chambers, listening to the silence. She was almost asleep when she heard a soft knock on the connecting door. "Seraphine?" Rowan's voice, muffled by the wood. "Are you awake?" She climbed out of bed and moved to the door, pressing her hand against it. Yes, I wanted to make sure you were all right after today. I'm all right. Good. That's good. A pause. Good night, then. Rowan? Yes? Thank you for what you said to the Earl, for defending me. You don't need to thank me for that. I know, but I wanted to anyway. Another pause. Then, do you want to open the door, just to talk? You don't have to. I understand if... Seraphine unlocked the door and pulled it open. Rowan stood on the other side in his shirt sleeves, his hair slightly mussed, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him look before. Behind him, his chambers were lit by firelight, warm and inviting. Hi, he said. Hi. They stared at each other for a moment, neither quite sure what to do now that there was no barrier between them. I'm not trying to pressure you, Rowan said quickly. I just thought we could talk. Like we used to at dinner, but more, I don't know, comfortable? All right. He stepped back, letting her into his chambers. They were simpler than hers, less decorated, more functional. A large bed dominated one wall. A desk sat near the window, covered in papers. Books lined the shelves. Seraphine moved to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. Rowan stayed near the door, giving her space. I've been thinking, he said finally, about what happens next. With society, with the family, with all of it. And I think we should go to London. She turned to look at him. What? Face it head on. Show them that we're united, that this marriage is real, and they can either accept it or not, but we're not hiding. She stopped, trying to process. That's the opposite of what I expected you to say. I know, but running and hiding would only make them think they're right, that our marriage is shameful or weak. I don't want to give them that satisfaction. London society will eat us alive. Probably, but we'll be eaten alive together. He managed a slight smile. And honestly, what's the worst they can do? Refuse to invite us to parties we don't want to attend anyway? Despite everything, Seraphine almost laughed. When did you stop caring what people think? About 3 weeks ago, when I realized I'd wasted 8 years caring more about society's opinions than my own wife's happiness. He moved closer, his expression serious. I'm not saying it'll be easy. London is going to be brutal, but I'd rather face that with you than spend the rest of my life hiding in this keep, pretending everything's fine when it isn't. Seraphine thought about it. The idea terrified her. Walking into London society as the scandalous duchess who'd somehow bewitched the cold Duke of Blackthorn. Being stared at, whispered about, judged. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was going back to invisibility, to pretending she didn't matter. All right, she said. We'll go to London. Relief flooded his face. Really? Really? But, Rowan? She moved closer to him. If we do this, if we face society together, you can't waver. You can't see Victoria Westmarch at some ball and wonder if you made the wrong choice. You can't hear your aunt's criticism and start thinking maybe she was right. I won't. Promise me. I promise. He took her hands, holding them gently. Seraphine, I know I've given you no reason to trust my promises, but I mean this one. Whatever happens in London, whatever anyone says or does, I'm with you. Only you. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, but all she saw was certainty. When do we leave? She asked. 2 weeks. That gives us time to prepare, and time for me to send letters ahead, making it clear that anyone who disrespects you will answer to me. That's going to make everything worse. Good. Let them know what they're dealing with up front. His grip on her hands tightened slightly. No more pretending. No more hiding what I feel. If society can't handle a duke who actually loves his wife, that's their problem. The word hung between them again. Love. He'd said it so casually this time, like it was simply a fact, like there was no question about it anymore. Do you? Seraphine asked quietly. Love me? Rowan went still. Then slowly, carefully, he pulled her closer until there was barely any space between them. Yes, he said. I do. I think I have for years, underneath all the fear and the walls I built, but I was too much of a coward to admit it, even to myself. And now? Now I'm still terrified, but I'd rather be terrified and honest than safe and alone. Seraphine felt something inside her chest crack open. 8 years of carefully guarded hope came flooding out, and she didn't try to stop it. "I loved you," she whispered. "When I first came here, I was 17 and naive, and I thought I could make you love me back if I just tried hard enough. But you never even looked at me." "I know. I'm sorry. After a while I stopped loving you. I had to, just to survive. But now—" She stopped, trying to find the words. "Now I think I could love you again. The real you, not the fantasy I created when I was 17. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "That you'll change your mind. That this is just guilt or obligation dressed up as something else. That I'll let myself love you, and then you'll remember why you kept your distance in the first place." Rowan cupped her face in his hands, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I probably will. I'm learning how to do this, how to be a real husband instead of just a title. But I can promise that I won't stop trying, that I won't retreat back behind my walls the moment things get difficult. That I'm in this, Seraphine, completely." She closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. All right. I'll try too. To trust you. To believe this is real. To let myself feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. Not the cold duke who'd ignored her for 8 years, not the broken man trying to fix his mistakes. Just Rowan, flawed and scared and trying so hard to be better than he'd been. "Hopeful," she said. "Terrified. Angry sometimes at what we lost, but mostly I just feel like maybe we're going to be all right. We are." He said it with absolute certainty. "We're going to be all right." Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like their wedding kiss 8 years ago, that brief, formal pressing of lips that had meant nothing. This was soft and careful and real, a question as much as a statement, an offering of everything he'd kept locked away for so long. Seraphine kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart pounding under her palms. It wasn't perfect. Their noses bumped, their teeth clicked once, but it was honest, and that made it more valuable than any perfect moment could have been. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "I should let you go back to your room," he said, "before I forget how to be patient." Seraphine smiled, the expression feeling strange and wonderful on her face. Probably wise. But she didn't move, and neither did he. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, letting themselves believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from the ruins of 8 wasted years. Eventually, Seraphine did go back to her chambers, but she left the connecting door unlocked. It was a small thing, a tiny gesture of trust. But small things, she was learning, were what built a life. And for the first time in 8 years, she was starting to believe they might actually build one together. The 2 weeks before London passed in a strange blur of preparation and growing intimacy. Seraphine found herself spending more time in Rowan's chambers than her own, sitting by his fire while he worked at his desk, reading while he reviewed estate documents. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just existed in the same space, comfortable with silence in a way they'd never been before. Other times they talked for hours, about everything and nothing. His childhood, her family, the books they'd read, the places they'd never been. Rowan told her about his father's brutality, the beatings disguised as discipline, the way affection had been systematically trained out of him. Seraphine told him about arriving at the keep at 17, terrified and hopeful, and watching that hope die slowly over months and years. "I used to practice conversations with you," she admitted one night, curled up in the chair by his fire. "Alone in my room. I'd imagine what I'd say if you ever actually talked to me, how I'd make you laugh or impress you with some clever observation. Then I'd see you in the hall and you wouldn't even look at me, and I'd feel so stupid." Rowan had gone quiet at that, his hands stilling on the papers he'd been reviewing. "I looked at you," he said finally. "More than you knew. I just made sure you never caught me at it." "Why?" "Because if you'd caught me, you might have smiled. And if you'd smiled at me like you meant it, I would have been lost." The confession sat between them, raw and honest. "Would that have been so terrible?" she asked. "At the time? Yes. Now? He looked at her directly. Now I realize I was already lost. I just spent 8 years pretending I wasn't. Moments like that were becoming more common. Small revelations, careful honesty, the slow process of actually knowing each other instead of just existing in the same house. But there were difficult moments too, times when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. When Rowan retreated into work for days and Seraphine felt the familiar cold distance creeping back. When she pushed too hard for reassurance and he didn't know how to give it. When they both wanted to run back to the safety of their separate corners instead of fighting through the discomfort of building something real. The difference now was that they talked about it. "You've been in your study for 3 days straight," Seraphine said one evening, standing in his doorway. "Are you avoiding me?" Rowan looked up from his papers, surprise flickering across his face. "No, there's a lot to manage before we leave for London." "Is that all it is?" He set down his pen. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you're already having second thoughts. If this is you slowly backing away without actually saying it." "It's not." He stood, moving around the desk toward her. "But you're right that I've been burying myself in work. It's what I do when I'm anxious. It's easier than sitting with uncomfortable feelings." The admission surprised her. "You're anxious about London?" "Terrified, actually. I'm about to parade our marriage in front of everyone who thinks I've lost my mind. I'm going to have to watch people disrespect you to your face and maintain enough composure not to call them out for duels." He ran a hand through his hair. "So yes, I've been hiding in paperwork. It's a coward's response, but it's mine." Seraphine moved into the study, closing the door behind her. "You could have told me that. I'm telling you now, after I had to come find you and ask." "You're right. I should have—" He stopped, frustration crossing his face. "I'm not good at this yet. At being open about what I'm feeling, at not defaulting to distance when things are hard." "I know, but you have to try. Because if you disappear into your study every time you're anxious or uncomfortable, we're going to end up right back where we started." "I don't want that." "Then prove it. When you're scared or overwhelmed, come find me. Talk to me. Don't lock yourself away and hope I won't notice." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that was becoming more natural each time. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing and just do better." She felt him smile against her hair. "Yes, ma'am." They stood like that for a while, holding each other in the book-lined study while snow fell outside. Then Rowan pulled back enough to look at her face. "Come to bed with me," he said. Seraphine's breath caught. "What?" "Not like that. Not yet. Just sleep beside me. I'm tired of the connecting door, tired of knowing you're 10 feet away, but we're still technically sleeping in separate rooms." She wanted to. The wanting was sharp and surprising, but fear held her back. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "All right." He didn't push, didn't argue, just accepted it. "But when you are, the offer stands. My door is always open." 3 days later, she took him up on it. It was past midnight, and she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about London, about society's judgment, about all the ways this fragile thing they were building could still fall apart. Finally, she got up, wrapped a robe around herself, and knocked softly on the connecting door. "Rowan, are you awake?" "Yes." His voice came immediately, like he'd been lying awake too. "Come in." She opened the door. He was sitting up in bed, reading by lamplight. When he saw her, he set the book aside. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No, I keep thinking about London, about facing your aunt and all those people who think I'm not good enough to be your wife." "You're more than good enough. I know you believe that, but they don't. And She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm scared that when we're there, surrounded by all those perfect aristocratic women, you'll start to see what they see. That I'm common and ordinary and not worth the scandal you're causing." Rowan threw back the covers and crossed to her in 3 strides. "Look at me." She did. "You are not ordinary. You survived 8 years in a house where you were actively ignored, where everyone treated you like you didn't matter and you didn't break. You kept your kindness, your strength, your ability to hope, even when hope seemed pointless. That's extraordinary. But I'm not. Not what? Not perfectly bred? Not trained from birth to be a duchess?" He cupped her face in his hands. "Good. I don't want someone who was manufactured for this role. I want you. Messy and real and brave enough to call me on my mistakes. Tears burned in her eyes. I don't feel brave. You are anyway. He kissed her forehead gently. And tomorrow night, when we're in London and some horrible person says something cruel, I'm going to remind you of that. But right now, will you please just come to bed? Because I'm tired of sleeping alone and I think you are too. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They climbed into his bed together, and it was awkward at first. Neither of them quite knew where to put their arms or how much space to leave between them. But eventually they settled with Seraphine's head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders, their legs tangled together under the blankets. "This is nice," she whispered. "Yes." His hand was stroking her hair slowly. "It is." "Rowan? I think I'm falling in love with you again. The real you, not the fantasy I made up when I was 17. His hand stilled for a moment, then resumed its gentle movement. "I hope you do, because I'm already there." They fell asleep like that, holding each other while the fire burned low and the keep settled into silence around them. And when morning came, Seraphine woke up still in his arms, neither of them having retreated to their separate corners during the night. It felt like victory. The journey to London took 3 days through winter weather that alternated between snow and freezing rain. They traveled in the ducal coach, Lucien accompanying them because he claimed he wouldn't miss the impending social disaster for anything. "It's going to be magnificent," he said cheerfully on the second day, Rowan glowering at anyone who looks at Seraphine wrong. Seraphine surprising everyone by having an actual backbone. Society matrons fainting from shock. I should sell tickets. "You're not helping," Seraphine said, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. "I'm not trying to help. I'm trying to entertain myself during a tedious journey." He stretched out across the opposite seat. "But truly, you're both worrying too much. The worst they can do is gossip and exclude you from parties, neither of which actually matters." "It matters to the family reputation," Rowan said. "The family reputation survived our father's cruelty and your 8 years of playing ice sculpture. It'll survive you being happily married." Lucien's expression turned more serious. "Besides, half of those society vultures are miserable in their own marriages. Seeing someone actually succeed at it might do them good." They arrived in London on a grey afternoon, the city shrouded in coal smoke and winter drizzle. The Blackthorn townhouse was in Mayfair, elegant and imposing, exactly what Seraphine had expected. Servants lined up to greet them, their faces carefully neutral, as they assessed the Duchess, who'd apparently bewitched their master. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, was a stern woman in her 50s who looked at Seraphine with barely concealed skepticism. "Your chambers have been prepared, Your Grace, though we weren't certain if you'd require separate rooms or—" "One room," Rowan said firmly. "The Duchess and I will share the master suite." Shock rippled through the assembled staff. Apparently word of their reconciliation hadn't spread to the London household yet. "Of course, Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton said, her expression suggesting this was highly irregular. "And Mrs. Pemberton?" Rowan's voice took on an edge. "Lady Blackthorn is the mistress of this household. Any disrespect shown to her will result in immediate dismissal. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." After the servants dispersed, Lucien let out a low whistle. "Well, that certainly set the tone." "Good," Rowan said. They needed to know where things stand. He led Seraphine upstairs to the master suite, a series of rooms that were somehow more intimidating than the Duchess's chambers at the keep. Everything was elegant, expensive, clearly designed to impress. Seraphine felt immediately out of place. "I hate it," she said, looking around at the heavy furniture and dark wallpaper. "Then change it." Rowan moved to stand beside her. "This is your house now, too. Make it feel like home. Your London steward will have an apoplexy." "Let him. I don't care." She turned to look at him. "You really don't, do you? Care what people think anymore? Not about things that matter. Not about you." He pulled her close. "Tomorrow we're attending the Pemberton ball. It'll be our first public appearance since the scandal broke. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll go anyway." "That's my Duchess." He kissed her softly. "Brave even when you're terrified." The Pemberton ball was exactly as awful as Seraphine had feared. They arrived fashionably late, which meant the ballroom was already full of London's elite. Conversation died the moment they were announced. every eye turned to stare at the Duke of Blackthorn and his suddenly visible Duchess. Seraphine felt naked under those stares. She wore a new gown Rowan had insisted on commissioning, deep sapphire silk that actually fit her properly, and Elspeth had arranged her hair in an elegant style. But none of that armor was enough against the weight of society's judgment. "Smile," Rowan murmured, his hand firm at her waist. "Let them see you're not ashamed." She lifted her chin and smiled, though it felt more like baring teeth. They moved through the crowd, and it parted before them like water. Whispers followed in their wake. Seraphine caught fragments of conversation. Common blood. Bewitched him somehow. Won't last a month. Embarrassing himself over nothing. Rowan's hand tightened at her waist, but his expression remained cold and controlled. They made their way to the receiving line, where Lord and Lady Pemberton greeted them with the kind of careful politeness that meant absolutely nothing. "Duke Blackthorn," Lord Pemberton said. "What a surprise to see you. We weren't certain you'd attend." "Why wouldn't I? My wife enjoys dancing." Rowan's voice was mild, but his eyes were hard. "You remember Lady Blackthorn, of course." "Of course." Lady Pemberton's smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked at Seraphine. "How lovely to see you, my dear. It's been so long since you've appeared in society." "Yes," Seraphine said quietly. "It has." "Well, welcome back. I'm sure everyone is simply dying to reacquaint themselves with you." The words were pleasant enough, but the tone made it clear that reacquaint meant dissect and judge. They moved on into the ballroom. Lucien appeared at Seraphine's elbow, having arrived separately to avoid being associated with their scandal. "It's worse than I thought," he said cheerfully. "They're looking at you like you're a curiosity at the museum. How are you holding up? I want to run away and hide." "Don't. That's what they're expecting, what they want. Instead, dance with your husband and show them you're not going anywhere." The orchestra started a waltz. Rowan turned to Seraphine and offered his hand. "May I?" he asked formally. She took it, letting him lead her onto the dance floor. They hadn't danced together since their wedding 8 years ago, a brief, awkward affair that had satisfied propriety and nothing else. But Rowan guided her now with confident ease, and Seraphine found herself following his lead naturally. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "I know. Ignore them." "That's easier said than done." "Then focus on me instead." He pulled her slightly closer than was strictly proper. "Look at me, Seraphine, not at them." She did. His eyes were storm gray and steady, anchoring her. "Better?" he asked. "A little." "Good. Because I need you to listen carefully. In approximately 30 seconds, my aunt is going to make her way over here. She's going to say something cutting designed to make you feel small, and you're going to smile at her and respond with perfect poise, because you are a duchess, and she cannot touch you." "I don't know how to do that." "Yes, you do. You've survived 8 years of her subtle cruelty. You know exactly how to handle her." The dance ended. Rowan led her off the floor, and sure enough, Lady Cordelia appeared as if summoned. "Rowan," she said coldly, "I see you brought your wife. How unexpected." "Why would it be unexpected? She's the Duchess of Blackthorn. Where else would she be?" "Oh, I don't know. Perhaps back in the country where she's been hiding for 8 years? Cordelia's smile was all teeth. "But I suppose things have changed. You've decided to make a spectacle of yourself over this girl. Consequence be damned." "Watch your tongue, Aunt." "Or what? You'll throw me out of another house?" Cordelia turned her attention to Seraphine. "Tell me, dear, how does it feel to know that half of London is taking bets on when your husband will come to his senses?" Seraphine felt the words like a slap, but Rowan's words echoed in her head. Smile and respond with perfect poise. "It must be exhausting," she said quietly, "spending so much energy on other people's marriages. Perhaps you should focus on your own happiness instead, Aunt." Cordelia's eyes went wide. Around them, several people had stopped pretending not to listen. "How dare you?" "No," Rowan interrupted, his voice cutting. "How dare you? You've had 8 years to say cruel things to my wife while I stood by and let it happen. That ends now. Seraphine is the Duchess of Blackthorn. She has my complete support and my complete loyalty. And if you cannot show her the respect she deserves, you are not welcome in my presence." "You're choosing her over your family?" "She is my family. You're just someone who shares my blood." He took Seraphine's hand. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised my wife another dance. He led her back onto the floor, leaving Cordelia standing alone, fury written across her face. That was... Seraphine couldn't find words. Overdue, Rowan finished. I should have done that 8 years ago. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Some people approached them with cautious friendliness. Others gave them a wide berth. A few brave souls actually congratulated Rowan on his marriage, clearly surprising him. But through it all, he never left Seraphine's side. Never let her face the judgment alone. And slowly, painfully, she began to believe that maybe they really could survive this. They were standing by the refreshment table when Victoria Westmarch appeared. She looked lovely in pale pink, her blonde hair perfectly arranged, every inch the perfect aristocratic lady. Duke Blackthorne, she said, her voice sweet. Lady Blackthorne, what a pleasure to see you both. Lady Victoria, Rowan said neutrally, I wanted to apologize for my father's behavior at your estate. It was presumptuous of him to arrive uninvited. She smiled at Seraphine. I hope there are no hard feelings. Of course not, Seraphine said, though she didn't believe the apology for a second. I'm so glad. It must be difficult, feeling like everyone's watching you, judging your every move, wondering if you're truly suited for your position. Victoria's voice was sympathetic, but her eyes were sharp. But I suppose love conquers all, doesn't it? The implication was clear, that Seraphine had trapped Rowan through emotion rather than merit, that their marriage was built on sentiment rather than sense. Actually, Seraphine said, her voice stronger than she expected, I think respect conquers all. Love is wonderful, but without respect and partnership, it crumbles. My husband and I are building something based on both. How modern of you. Victoria's smile tightened. Well, I wish you the very best, truly. After she glided away, Rowan leaned down to whisper in Seraphine's ear. That was perfect. Was it? I felt like I was going to vomit. You didn't show it. You handled her like a duchess who knows her own worth. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I'm proud of you. The words warmed her from the inside out. They left the ball around midnight, exhausted and overwhelmed. In the carriage ride home, Seraphine leaned against Rowan's shoulder while he held her hand. One down, she said. How many more of these do we have to attend? As many as it takes to prove we're not going anywhere. That's a terrible answer. I know. He pulled her closer. But we'll get through it together. Back at the townhouse, they climbed the stairs to their shared chambers. Seraphine's feet ached from dancing and her head throbbed from tension, but underneath the exhaustion was something else. Pride. She'd survived her first London society event in years, and she hadn't crumbled under the weight of their judgment. While Elspeth helped her out of the elaborate gown, Rowan changed in the dressing room. When they finally climbed into bed together, both of them were too tired for conversation. But as she settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her ear, Seraphine realized something important. This was becoming normal. Not easy, not perfect, but normal. The weight of his arm around her waist, the warmth of his body beside hers, the simple comfort of not being alone. Rowan, she whispered. Thank you. For tonight. For not leaving me to face them alone. I'll never leave you to face anything alone again. His voice was rough with sleep. That's a promise. She believed him. That was the scary part. She actually believed him. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of social obligations. More balls, dinner parties, afternoon teas where aristocratic ladies asked pointed questions disguised as friendly concern. Through all of it, Rowan stayed at her side, deflecting criticism, shutting down gossip, making it clear that anyone who disrespected his wife would answer to him. Slowly, grudgingly, society began to accept them. Not everyone. Lady Cordelia continued to spread vicious rumors. The Earl of Westmarch made it known that he considered Rowan a traitor to his class. But enough people came around, either out of genuine goodwill or fear of the Duke's displeasure, that the scandal began to lose its teeth. But the constant pressure wore on both of them. Rowan grew tense and short-tempered, snapping at servants and spending hours in his study reviewing correspondence that probably didn't need immediate attention. Seraphine found herself exhausted all the time, putting on a brave face in public and then collapsing in private. They fought for the first time on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Seraphine had just returned from a particularly brutal tea where 3 different women had made veiled comments about her inability to produce an heir. She was raw and hurting, and when she found Rowan in his study, she needed comfort. But he was distracted, barely looking up from his papers when she entered. "Not now," he said. "I'm dealing with a problem on the northern estate. I need to talk to you." "It'll have to wait." Something inside her snapped. "No, it can't wait. I've spent the last 3 hours being politely eviscerated by women who think I'm not good enough for you, and I need my husband to actually acknowledge that I exist." Rowan looked up then, irritation crossing his face. "I'm working, Seraphine. Whatever happened at tea can wait an hour." "Can it?" "Because you've been working every day for the past week, hiding in here instead of actually being present." "I'm not hiding. I'm managing the estates that actually matter for our future. And I'm managing society, which is equally exhausting, but you don't see me disappearing for hours at a time." "That's not fair." "None of this is fair." Her voice rose. "You dragged me to London to prove our marriage was real, and now you're doing exactly what you did at the Keep, using work as an excuse to avoid actually dealing with difficult emotions." Rowan stood, his expression hardening. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm trying to keep our lives running while also managing the disaster my aunt has created with her gossip." "Then let me help." "Instead of shutting me out and pretending everything's fine when it's not." "I'm not shutting you out." "Yes, you are. Every time I try to talk to you about how hard this is, you change the subject or bury yourself in correspondence. Every time I need reassurance, you're too busy. I'm alone in this marriage again, Rowan, and I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't do it anymore." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Rowan's expression shifted from anger to something more complicated. "You're not alone." "Then prove it. Stop hiding from me." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. After a long moment, he set down the papers he'd been holding and moved around the desk toward her. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have been hiding. These past 2 weeks it's been harder than I expected, watching them judge you, watching them tear apart our marriage for entertainment. And instead of processing that with you, I've been retreating into work because that's what I know how to do." "I need you to stop doing that." "I know." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for reverting to old patterns, for making you feel alone again, for not being the husband you need me to be." Seraphine pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. Actually, here, not just physically present, but mentally checked out." "I will be. I promise." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the study while rain drummed against the windows. Eventually, Rowan pulled back enough to look at her face. "Tell me about tea," he said. "What happened?" So she did. She told him about every cutting remark, every veiled insult, every moment she'd had to smile and pretend their words didn't hurt. And he listened without interrupting, his jaw growing tighter with each detail. When she finished, he said, "I want names." "What?" "Names. Of the women who said those things. I'll make sure they're not invited to any event we're hosting." Despite everything, Seraphine almost smiled. "You can't ban half of London society from our house." "Watch me." His expression was fierce. "No one gets to hurt you and then expect my hospitality. They can gossip all they want, but they'll do it somewhere else." She touched his face gently. "I love that you want to protect me, but we have to be smart about this. Banning people just proves we're weak, that their words have power over us." "Then what do you suggest?" "We keep showing up, keep being united. Eventually they'll get bored and move on to the next scandal." She paused. "But in the meantime, I need you to be my partner in this, not my protector who vanishes when things get hard." "I will be." He kissed her forehead. "I'm still learning how to do this, how to be vulnerable, how to face difficult things instead of running from them. But I'm trying." "I know. So am I." They didn't make love that night. They still hadn't crossed that threshold, both of them wary of moving too fast after 8 years of distance. But they held each other until sleep came, and that felt like enough. The breakthrough came 3 days later at the Ashworth dinner party. It was a smaller gathering, only 20 people, which somehow made it more intense. Seraphine was seated between Lord Ashworth and a pompous baron who kept explaining things to her like she was slow-witted. Across the table, Rowan watched with barely contained frustration. Halfway through the third course, Lady Ashworth addressed the table at large. I was reading the most fascinating article about heredity. Apparently some bloodlines are simply stronger than others, more likely to produce healthy children and capable heirs. The implication was clear. Seraphine felt her face heat. Interesting, Rowan said coldly. And what do the experts say about bloodlines that produce petty gossips and social vultures? Are those considered strong or weak? The table went silent. Lady Ashworth's face turned red. I beg your pardon? You're discussing heredity at a dinner table specifically to insult my wife. Don't pretend otherwise. Rowan set down his fork with deliberate precision. So let me be very clear. Seraphine is my wife. She is the Duchess of Blackthorn, and anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Is that understood? Rowan, Lord Ashworth said uncomfortably, there's no need. There's every need. Rowan stood, offering his hand to Seraphine. We're leaving. Thank you for the dinner, though the company left much to be desired. They walked out together, leaving shocked silence in their wake. In the carriage home, Seraphine started laughing. She couldn't help it, the absurdity of it all, the way Rowan had just destroyed years of careful social connections to defend her honor. That was insane, she said. That was necessary, but he was smiling too. We'll be banned from half the dinner parties in London now. Oh no. However will we survive? They looked at each other and both started laughing, the sound echoing in the small space of the carriage. And Seraphine realized that this ability to laugh together at the absurdity of their situation, was worth more than all of London society's approval. When they arrived home, Rowan pulled her close in the entrance hall, not caring that servants might see. I'm done, he said. Done with what? Trying to please people who will never accept us anyway. Trying to prove we're worthy of their approval. Trying to play by rules designed to keep us apart. He cupped her face in his hands. I'd rather have you and nothing else than have their approval and lose you. Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes. You're not going to lose me. Promise? I promise. You're stuck with me now. He kissed her then, deep and urgent and full of everything they'd been building toward for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Come to bed with me, he said. Really come to bed with me. No more separate spaces. No more careful distance. I want you, Seraphine. All of you. She searched his face, looking for doubt or obligation, but all she saw was certainty and desire and love. All right, she whispered. Yes. They climbed the stairs together, hand in hand, leaving London's judgment and society's expectations behind them. And in the master suite of the townhouse, they finally crossed the last threshold between them, discovering each other with patience and care, and the kind of intimacy that only comes from choosing someone completely. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments and nervous laughter and the simple strangeness of being truly vulnerable with another person after so many years of walls. But it was real and honest and theirs. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Seraphine realized that something fundamental had shifted. They weren't two people trying to fix a broken marriage anymore. They were partners, building something entirely new from the ruins of what had never really existed in the first place. I love you, she said quietly. Rowan's arms tightened around her. I love you too. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for finally showing up. Outside, London slept, ignorant of the small revolution happening in the Blackthorn townhouse. A marriage reborn. A love finally realized. Two people who'd spent 8 years as strangers finding their way home to each other at last. It had cost them both dearly, reputation, family connections, the approval of society. But as Seraphine drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she knew without doubt that they'd gotten the better end of the bargain. Love, it turned out, was worth more than all of London's approval combined. Morning came softly, gray light filtering through the curtains to find them still tangled together. Seraphine woke first, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back. Rowan's arm was heavy across her waist, his breathing deep and steady against her shoulder. She turned carefully to look at his face, relaxed in sleep in a way it never was when he was awake. This was real. They were real. After 8 years of living as strangers, they'd finally found their way to each other. She touched his face gently, tracing the line of his jaw. His eyes opened, storm gray, and immediately focused on her. Good morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." They lay there for a while, just looking at each other, neither quite ready to break the spell of what they'd found the night before. Eventually, Rowan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None? You?" "Only that we wasted 8 years getting here. We can't get those years back." "I know. But we have all the years ahead." He pulled back to look at her properly. "I meant what I said last night. I'm done trying to please society. If they can't accept us, we'll build our life without them." "What about your position, your responsibilities?" "I'll still manage the estates, still fulfill my duties to the tenants and the lands, but my private life is mine, ours. No more performing for an audience that will never be satisfied anyway." Seraphine propped herself up on one elbow. "You realize that's going to cause more scandal." "Let it. I've spent my entire life being what other people expected. Controlled, disciplined, above emotion. It made me miserable and it made you miserable. I'm finished with that." She studied his face, looking for doubt, but all she saw was certainty. "All right then," she said. "We'll scandalize London together." He smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "That's my duchess." They stayed in London for another month, but everything had changed. Rowan stopped accepting invitations to events that felt like obligations. When they did attend social functions, he made it clear that anyone who disrespected Seraphine would face immediate consequences. Several prominent families found themselves publicly cut by the Duke of Blackthorn after making snide remarks about his wife. The gossip grew worse at first. People whispered that the Duke had lost his mind, that his common wife had somehow bewitched him, that the Blackthorn family was falling apart. But gradually, something shifted. A few brave souls began to admire what Rowan was doing, choosing love over duty, his wife over society's approval. Others simply accepted that the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn were a package deal, and if you wanted one, you had to respect the other. Lucian watched it all with amused satisfaction. "You've completely upended the social order," he told Rowan one evening over brandy. "Half of London thinks you're insane, and the other half is jealous that you had the courage to do what they're too cowardly to attempt." "Which half are you in?" Rowan asked. "Neither. I've always known you were insane." Lucian grinned. "But I'm glad you finally figured out what matters. Took you long enough." "I'm aware." "And Seraphine? How is she handling all this?" Rowan glanced toward the drawing room where Seraphine was playing piano for a small gathering of friends. Actual friends, not social obligations. Her music filled the townhouse, bright and alive. "She's stronger than anyone gave her credit for," he said quietly, "including me. She survived 8 years of my neglect and society's cruelty, and she came out of it with her kindness intact. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done." Lucian raised his glass. "To Seraphine, then, the woman who brought my brother back to life." They drank to that. The turning point with society came at the Haverford Ball 3 weeks later. It was one of the most prestigious events of the season, and Rowan had initially declined the invitation. But Seraphine had convinced him to attend. "We can't hide forever," she'd said. "Eventually we have to show them we're not going anywhere." So they went, dressed in their finest, prepared for judgment. The ballroom was packed with London's elite, all of whom turned to stare when they were announced. But this time, Seraphine didn't shrink under their gazes. She lifted her chin and walked in on her husband's arm like she belonged there. Because she did. Lady Cordelia was there, of course, surrounded by her usual circle of gossips. When she saw them, her expression hardened. "I see the wayward Duke has decided to grace us with his presence," she said loudly enough to be overheard. "And brought his pet with him." The insult hung in the air. Several people gasped. Rowan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Seraphine stepped forward. "Lady Cordelia," she said calmly, "how lovely to see you. I trust you're well?" Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "Spare me the false pleasantries, girl. Everyone here knows exactly what you are." "Do they? Then perhaps you could enlighten me, since I'm unclear on your meaning." "You're a nobody, a common girl who trapped a duke through manipulation and tears, and now you're parading around like you belong in society." The crowd had gone completely silent, everyone straining to hear. Seraphine felt the familiar surge of shame trying to rise up. The voice that said Cordelia was right, that she was common and unworthy and foolish for thinking she could be anything else. But then she felt Rowan's presence beside her, solid and supportive. She thought about everything they'd survived together. 8 years of loneliness, weeks of scandal, the slow, painful work of building something real. And she realized she was done being ashamed. "You're right," she said clearly. "I am common. My family has no great wealth or ancient titles. I wasn't trained from birth to be a duchess. I came to Blackthorn Keep at 17 with nothing but hope and good intentions, and for 8 years I was made to feel like those things were worthless." Cordelia's smile was triumphant. Finally, some honesty. "I'm not finished." Seraphine's voice was steady. "For 8 years I believed what people like you told me, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve my position, that I should be grateful for the crumbs of respect I was given. But I've learned something recently. My worth was never determined by your approval. I survived 8 years in a house where I was actively ignored, where I was treated like a mistake that everyone was too polite to mention, and I came out of it with my kindness intact, my strength intact, my ability to love intact. If that makes me common, then I'll wear that label with pride." She turned to address the room at large. "I know what you all think of me. I've heard the whispers, the speculation, the bets on when my husband will tire of me. But here's what you don't understand. My marriage isn't your entertainment. My life isn't a spectacle for your judgment. And I'm not asking for your approval anymore because I don't need it. I have something far more valuable. A husband who chose me over your expectations, and a marriage we built ourselves from the ground up." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Cordelia's face was mottled with rage. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "I dare because I'm the Duchess of Blackthorn," Seraphine said quietly. "And I'm done pretending to be smaller than I am just to make other people comfortable. If that offends you, Aunt, then I suggest you avoid our company in the future." She turned and walked away, Rowan following immediately. They made it halfway across the ballroom before the whispers started, then grew into actual conversation. Seraphine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "That was incredible," Rowan said, pulling her into an alcove away from prying eyes. "You were incredible. I think I'm going to be sick." "You're not. You're going to breathe, and then we're going to go back out there and dance like you just didn't verbally destroy my aunt in front of half of London." "I shouldn't have." "You should have. You should have done it 8 years ago, and I should have been the one defending you." He cupped her face in his hands. "But you just stood up for yourself in a way I never could. You just showed every person in that ballroom that you're not someone to be pitied or dismissed. I am so proud of you." Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes. "Everyone's going to talk about this." "Good. Let them talk about how the Duchess of Blackthorn has a backbone, how she faced down the cruelest gossip in London and didn't back down, how she's not going anywhere no matter how much they want her to disappear." They stayed in the alcove for another minute, holding each other while Seraphine's heartbeat slowly returned to normal. Then they went back out into the ballroom, and something amazing happened. People approached them, not to gossip or judge, but to offer genuine congratulations. Several women told Seraphine that they'd wanted to say something to Lady Cordelia for years, but never had the courage. A few men clapped Rowan on the shoulder and told him he was lucky to have a wife with such spirit. Even Lord Haverford himself came over to express his admiration for Seraphine's composure. "That took remarkable courage, Lady Blackthorn," he said. "Cordelia has needed to be put in her place for decades. I'm delighted you were the one to do it." By the end of the evening, the narrative had shifted. Seraphine wasn't the common girl who'd trapped a duke anymore. She was the brave duchess who'd faced down society's cruelty with dignity and strength. The woman who'd stood up to Lady Cordelia Blackthorn and won. It wasn't universal acceptance. There were still plenty of people who disapproved, who thought Rowan had made a terrible mistake, who would never fully accept Seraphine as one of them. But enough minds had changed, enough opinions had shifted, that the suffocating weight of judgment began to lift. They left London a week later, returning to Blackthorn Keep as spring began to touch the countryside. The journey back felt different from the journey there, lighter somehow, as if they'd shed some heavy burden along the way. Lucien accompanied them again, though he was planning to leave for the continent once they were settled. "My creditors have finally been paid off," he explained, "which means I'm free to go cause scandals in foreign countries instead of domestic ones." "You could stay," Seraphine said. "The keep feels different with you here, less serious." "That's exactly why I need to leave. Too much domesticity and I might become respectable. Can't have that. But his smile was warm. Besides, you two don't need me anymore. You figured out how to be married all on your own. Rowan clasped his brother's shoulder. Thank you. For coming back. For pushing me to see what I was doing wrong. We wouldn't have fixed this without you. Yes, you would have. It just would have taken longer. Lucian glanced between them. But you're welcome anyway. Someone had to tell you you were being an idiot. He left 3 days after they arrived back at the keep, promising to write and visit when he could. Seraphine stood with Rowan at the entrance, watching Lucian's carriage disappear down the drive. I'm going to miss him, she said. So am I. But he's right. We don't need him anymore. Rowan pulled her close. We have each other. That's enough. The spring and summer that followed were the happiest months Seraphine had ever known. They spent their days riding across the estate, managing the household together, entertaining friends who visited from London. Rowan showed her all the corners of the property she'd never seen, places he'd explored as a boy. She taught him how to laugh without looking over his shoulder for his father's disapproval. They fought sometimes, real fights, not the careful avoidance of their early marriage. Seraphine called him out when he retreated into work instead of dealing with emotions. Rowan pushed back when she tried to make herself smaller to avoid conflict. But they learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to compromise instead of just giving in. The servants noticed the change in the household. There was laughter in the halls now, music spilling from the piano. The Duke and Duchess taking meals together, walking in the gardens together, actually existing as a partnership instead of two people orbiting each other warily. Mrs. Aldrich, the housekeeper, confided to Elspeth that she'd never seen the keep feel so much like a home. It's like the house itself is breathing again, she said, after 20 years of being frozen. One evening in late summer, Seraphine found Rowan in his study staring at a letter. His expression was troubled. What is it? She asked. My aunt. She's written to say she's selling her London house and moving to Bath. She claims it's for her health, but I think it's because she can't face the fact that she lost. Lost what? The fight to keep me cold and controlled. The fight to maintain the old family standards. The fight against our marriage. He set down the letter. She spent 8 years trying to convince me you weren't worthy of being a duchess, and now she's the one who's been cast out of society for her cruelty. Seraphine moved to sit on the edge of his desk. Do you feel guilty about that? I should. She's family, but mostly I just feel relieved. He looked up at her. Is that terrible? No, it's honest. She made your life harder for years. She made my life miserable. You don't owe her your guilt just because you share blood. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. How did I not see it before? How remarkable you are. You were too busy protecting yourself to see anything. I was, but I see you now, and I'm not looking away again. They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the silence. Then Seraphine said quietly, I think I might be pregnant. Rowan went absolutely still. What? I'm not certain yet, but I'm late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings, and she stopped, nervous about his reaction. I know we never really talked about children. If you're not ready, or if you don't want... Seraphine. He turned her to face him fully, his eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. Are you serious? I think so. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was sure, but... He kissed her, deep and thorough and full of joy. When he pulled back, he was smiling wider than she'd ever seen. I would love nothing more than to have a child with you, he said, but only if you want it, only if you're ready. I'm terrified, she admitted, of childbirth, of being a mother, of all of it. But I want this. I want a family with you, a real family, built on love instead of obligation. Then we'll build one together. He pressed a hand gently to her stomach. And this child will grow up knowing they're wanted, knowing their parents chose each other, knowing that love is strength, not weakness. Tears streamed down Seraphine's face. Your father would have hated that. Good, then we're doing it right. The pregnancy was confirmed a week later by the local physician. Seraphine was due in late winter. Around the anniversary of that night, she'd cried out Rowan's name in her sleep, and everything had changed. The news spread through the household like wildfire. Servants who'd watched the Duchess fade into invisibility over 8 years now saw her bloom into something vibrant and alive. The entire estate seemed to shift, becoming warmer, more hopeful, as if the promise of new life was contagious. Letters arrived from London, some congratulating them genuinely, others making pointed remarks about the timing, suggesting the pregnancy was why Rowan had suddenly decided to acknowledge his wife. Those letters went straight into the fire. "Let them think what they want," Rowan said. "We know the truth. This child was conceived in love, not obligation. That's all that matters." The pregnancy was difficult. Seraphine was sick most mornings and exhausted all the time. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of carrying new life felt overwhelming. But Rowan was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, reading to her when she couldn't sleep, rubbing her swollen feet without complaint. "I didn't expect you to be this patient," she said one evening as he helped her into bed. "I have 8 years of impatience to make up for," he replied. "And honestly, this is the least I can do. You're growing an entire human being. I can handle some disturbed sleep and extra pillows." Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick drifts around the keep. Seraphine spent most of her time indoors, her belly swelling with each passing week. She was huge and uncomfortable and tired of pregnancy, but underneath the discomfort was a deep contentment she'd never known before. She was building a family. Not the cold, dutiful family she'd expected when she married at 17, but something warm and real and chosen. The baby came on a frigid night in February during a snowstorm that buried the keep in white. Labor was long and brutal and terrifying. Seraphine screamed through contractions that felt like they would tear her apart, gripping Rowan's hand so hard she thought she might break bones. "I can't do this," she sobbed at one point. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can," Rowan said firmly, his face pale but determined. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived 8 years in this house when you had every reason to leave. You stood up to my aunt in front of all of London. You brought me back to life when I'd given up on living. You can do this." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll face it together." "But nothing is going wrong. You're going to bring our child into this world, and they're going to be so lucky to have you as their mother." Hours later, as dawn broke over the snow-covered estate, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and absolutely perfect. The midwife placed her in Seraphine's arms, and the world narrowed to just the three of them, mother, father, and the tiny person they'd created together. "She's beautiful," Rowan whispered, touching his daughter's face with trembling fingers. "She's perfect." "She has your eyes," Seraphine said, exhausted but exhilarated. "Storm gray." "And your nose." He was crying, tears streaming down his face without shame. "Thank you for this, for her, for everything." They named her Eleanor after Seraphine's grandmother, Eleanor Blackthorne, who would grow up in a house filled with love instead of silence, who would see her parents hold hands and laugh and actually enjoy each other's company, who would never have to wonder if she was wanted. The first few months were chaos. Neither of them had any idea what they were doing, and Eleanor was a demanding baby who cried often and slept rarely. Seraphine was exhausted beyond anything she'd imagined, and Rowan walked around looking slightly shell-shocked most of the time. But they figured it out together, took turns walking Eleanor when she cried at night, learned to function on broken sleep and cold tea, discovered that they could handle almost anything as long as they had each other. One morning when Eleanor was 3 months old, Seraphine found Rowan standing by the nursery window, holding their daughter while she slept. Dawn light filtered through the curtains, casting everything in soft gold. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. "Didn't want to. I wanted to memorize this." He looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. 9 months ago, I was still that cold bastard who'd wasted 8 years of your life. And now I'm standing here holding our daughter with a wife who chose to love me despite having every reason not to. How did I get this lucky?" Seraphine moved to stand beside him, looking down at Eleanor's sleeping face. "You got lucky because you finally stopped running from what you felt, because you chose to be brave instead of safe." "So did you." "So did I," she agreed. They stood there together in the quiet nursery, a family built from ruins and second chances and the stubborn refusal to give up on something worth fighting for. Spring came again, bringing warmth and green grass and flowers blooming in the gardens. Eleanor learned to smile, then laugh, then babble nonsense that her parents pretended to understand. The keep filled with life and noise, and the beautiful mess of actually living instead of just existing. Lucien returned for a visit in May, arriving with gifts and stories of his adventures abroad. He took one look at Rowan, relaxed and smiling, with his daughter asleep against his shoulder, and shook his head in wonder. "You're completely different," he said. "The brother I grew up with would never have allowed anyone to see him like this. Vulnerable, happy, human." "That brother was miserable," Rowan replied, "and making everyone around him miserable too." "True. But you fixed it, both of you did." Lucian looked between them. "That's the remarkable thing, I think. You didn't just repair what was broken, you built something entirely new." He was right. The marriage Seraphine and Rowan had now bore no resemblance to the cold arrangement they'd started with. This was partnership built on honesty, on vulnerability, on the daily choice to show up for each other even when it was hard. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still struggled, still had moments of doubt and frustration. But they faced those moments together instead of retreating to separate corners. That was the difference. Not perfection, but partnership. One evening in late summer, Seraphine sat in the garden watching Rowan play with Eleanor on a blanket spread across the grass. Their daughter was almost a year old now, sitting up on her own and grabbing at everything in reach. She laughed as Rowan made faces at her, the sound bright and clear in the warm air. Elspeth found her there, smiling. "It's good to see you happy, my lady," the maid said quietly. "After all those years of—" She stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. "After all those years of being miserable?" Seraphine finished gently. "It's all right. We both know what this house used to be like. It's different now, better. The whole staff feels it. I'm glad. This place should feel like a home, not a prison." After Elspeth left, Seraphine thought about the woman she'd been 9 years ago. 17 years old, arriving at this keep with nothing but hope and good intentions. That girl had been broken slowly by neglect and silence, had learned to make herself invisible just to survive, had almost lost herself completely in the cold stone walls of her marriage. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd found her strength in the loneliest places. And when Rowan had finally been ready to meet her halfway, she'd been brave enough to take the risk. That was the thing about love, she realized. It required courage. Not just the courage to open your heart, but the courage to keep it open even when you were scared. The courage to choose vulnerability over safety, honesty over pretense, partnership over isolation. It would have been so much easier to leave, to accept that the marriage was a failure and start over somewhere else. Society would have judged her, but she could have survived that. Could have built a quiet life somewhere far from London and Blackthorn Keep and the man who'd spent 8 years pretending she didn't exist. But she'd stayed. And Rowan had finally woken up. And together they'd built something that neither of them could have created alone. That was worth more than any amount of ease or safety. Rowan looked up from where he was playing with Eleanor and caught her watching. He smiled, the warm, unguarded smile that still sometimes surprised her, and waved her over. Seraphine joined them on the blanket, letting Eleanor crawl into her lap while Rowan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "What were you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different everything is." "Better? So much better." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Worth all of it. The pain, the loneliness, the struggle. Worth it for this." Eleanor babbled something incomprehensible and grabbed at Seraphine's hair. Rowan gently extracted the tiny fist, laughing when their daughter immediately reached for his nose instead. "She's going to be strong-willed," he said, "like her mother. And stubborn, like her father. Heaven help us." They sat in the garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Around them, the keep stood solid and ancient, its cold stone walls warmed by the life happening within them. Servants moved through the halls with purpose instead of fear. Music drifted from open windows. Laughter echoed in rooms that had been silent for decades. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn had done what many thought impossible. They'd taken a marriage built on duty and expectation and absence and transformed it into something real and warm and alive. They'd chosen each other when they could have walked away. They'd fought for each other when society said they shouldn't. They'd built a family from the ruins of 8 wasted years. And in doing so, they'd learned something that people often forgot in their pursuit of perfect love. The strongest relationships weren't the ones that never struggled. They were the ones that struggled and chose to keep fighting anyway. The ones that looked at their brokenness and said, "We can fix this." The ones that valued honesty over harmony, growth over comfort, partnership over individual pride. Love wasn't weakness, despite what Rowan's father had taught him. Love was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. And every day they chose it again, through disagreements and exhaustion, through the mundane frustrations of life and the occasional moments of pure joy. That was the real victory. Not that they'd survived 8 years of a broken marriage, but that they'd had the courage to break it apart completely and build something better from the pieces. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rowan pulled Seraphine closer. Eleanor nestled between them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me, on us, on the possibility that things could be different." "Thank you for finally showing up," she replied, echoing the words she'd said to him that first night in London. "For choosing me over your fear, for building this with me." Eleanor made a sleepy sound and nestled deeper into her mother's arms. Soon she'd need to be taken inside for bed, to start the nightly routine of feeding and bathing and rocking her to sleep. But for now they sat in the garden as night fell over Blackthorn Keep, a family held together by choice and courage, and the kind of love that only comes from facing the worst of yourself and deciding to be better. The frost that had ruled this house for so long had finally melted, and in its place, something warm and real and worth fighting for had grown. That was the truth they'd learned through 8 years of silence and 1 year of struggle. Love wasn't about being perfect or never making mistakes or always knowing the right thing to say. Love was about showing up, about choosing each other daily, about being brave enough to be vulnerable and patient enough to grow. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very stubborn, love was about second chances, about taking something broken and making it whole, about transforming a prison into a home. Seraphine and Rowan had done that, together. And as they carried their sleeping daughter inside, walking through halls that now felt warm instead of cold, they knew without speaking that they'd keep doing it, choosing each other, building their life, writing a better story than the one they'd started with. The keep stood solid in the darkness, its windows glowing with light, its rooms filled with the kind of life that only comes from people who've learned what actually matters. And somewhere in the cold stone walls, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of all those wasted years finally being forgiven. Because that's what love did, in the end. It didn't erase the past or pretend the pain hadn't happened. It simply said, "We survived that, and we chose to build something better." That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.